Mr. Clerk, please record.
There's a quorum present, Mr. President.
Are there any items for the record?
I have no items at this time, Mr. President.
Proceeding to the queue, Senator Walls, you're recognized to speak. Waived. Senator Dover, you're recognized to speak. Senator Dover. Senator Dover, you're recognized to speak.
Everybody's tired. Sorry.
I just would like to reiterate that the $70 million would actually definitely affect any money being left for the floor. And furthermore, it would take, the 68 million, I believe, in 4 years from now would make that a negative. So I just would like to reiterate, I think we need to be very careful about taking the 70 million out of the budget. And it sounds as though some people are discussing possibilities. So I look forward to being able to reach an agreement to take and put into the budget the $70 million and return that to Nebraska taxpayers. Thank you. I yield the rest of my time to the President.
Thank you, Senator Dover. Senator Dungan, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I do rise again in favor of the motion to reconsider. I have Senators Frederickson and Hunt standing in front of me making faces. I'm just going to call them out for that right now, instead of have them do that the entirety of my talk. I do rise again in favor of the motion to reconsider. Colleagues, I was speaking earlier about whether or not we even have the authority to actually take money from this fund. If you recall, the issue I think at hand with regards to the unemployment insurance trust fund is that it is in fact that. It is a special fund created for the money to be held in trust. And so one of the questions that cropped up in talking with other individuals about this is whether or not the money that's actually being charged by these businesses in order to go into that fund is a tax. And the reason that that's a relevant question is the legislature obviously has authority to move money around if it is in fact a tax. Taxes are things that the legislature has given specific authority over. But if the money that's being charged, that fee, is coming from those businesses and being placed into the unemployment trust fund, if that's not actually a tax, then colleagues, the legislature doesn't have the authority to actually move that money around as we see fit, pursuant to our normal authority to operate with taxes. This is actually a question that was raised a little while back in a Nebraska Supreme Court case brought by our former Senator Schumacher, in which there was an entire conversation on whether or not a surcharge or a fee on a phone bill assessed by the Public Service Commission was a tax. That had to do with whether or not it was an unconstitutional tax with a delegation of authority. But the question at hand that the Supreme Court addressed was whether or not a fee is the same thing as a tax. Ultimately, the court in that case held that the fee was not a tax, even though it was imposed by and collected by the government. I want to say that again. In that circumstance, that fee, that surcharge, is not a tax. The court held that whether a fee or charge is a tax depends in part on whether the quote-unquote primary purpose of the fee is not to generate revenue for governmental purposes, but rather to regulate a business or an industry. So in determining whether or not an actual fee or a surcharge falls under the category of a tax, it's kind of a larger question, but the main thrust of the issue at hand would be whether or not the collection of that fee is for general spending and general governmental purposes. It's very clear that the state unemployment insurance trust fund in section 48622 is not a tax. At no point in there do they say that it's a tax, nor do they call it a tax, but instead I think it's very clearly a fee, because the purpose with which that money is collected is not to generate revenue for governmental expenses or services. Why does that matter? That means that ultimately, colleagues, I do not believe that we have the statutory or constitutional authority to do what this proposed cash transfer or sweep does. By virtue of the fact that we're not taking money out of a cash fund collected by general taxes, but instead we're taking money out of that state unemployment trust fund that was a fee or a surcharge specifically collected for that purpose, for the administration of that insurance for unemployment, we simply just don't have the authority to do this. Now, I understand the concerns that have been raised about whether or not, if we do this, there's going to be money for other things. But that is not the question we should be asking, colleagues. The question we should be asking is whether or not we actually have the authority to do this. I am concerned that if this transfer or sweep out of the state unemployment insurance trust fund happens, I believe there will be a court case. And I believe that based on some of the findings by the Supreme Court in Nebraska, it's entirely possible that they could find, and probable actually, based on the actual case law on this exact issue, that this is not a tax that we have the authority to move around. So, colleagues, whether or not it's the right thing to do.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. Whether or not this is the correct decision, I think we should be thinking about whether or not we even can do this. In order to actually move this money around, there should have been a hearing on a substantive piece of legislation to modify the underlying statute 48622 to allow for the usage of that money to be used elsewhere. And so by virtue of the fact that it didn't happen, and this is just happening through 1413's cash sweep, I think it's problematic. I think it is potentially legally not allowed. And I think we should slow down and look at whether or not this is even something we have the authority to do. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Dungan. Senator Doran, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Lieutenant Governor. I hadn't been watching. I call it, we have our sheet, what lists our agenda here every day. And I knew that once our budget comes out, then fiscal office starts putting out the so-called, our fiscal sheet or whatever. So we have a green sheet also on this tablet or whatever. And I think we really need to, I understand why everybody's talking about the unemployment, the 60, 70 million, bringing that back or not. That's part of the discussion what we have today here. But on that green sheet on the front page, and I've talked about this before a little bit, you need to look at, it looks like we have 574 million to the floor right now as we sit here, or what came out with the budget. And that second 2 years over or at the next end of our next budget, what we put out, that shows 68 million. People, you also need to look at what I call the back of the page. That gives the impact of bills pending. In other words, it lists all the bills on final reading and how that will affect our financial situation. I want you about the middle of the page to go and look, final reading on E&R final, it says. And you need to look at those numbers as you go to the right. 558 million now it says we have at the floor, but you need to right now, right above it, it says 16 million, 17 million, 17 million. At the end of the next 2-year fiscal, we're gonna have 18 million. Then look at the one right below it. On select file, if we approve final reading and select file, we are now at a negative $12 million 2 years out. Go back to the first page, and the ending balance at minimum reserve, it shows it right above the numbers in the square there, 353 million, 338 million. We won't even be at that minimum balance 2 years out if some of these things are taking place. We have over the years, over the last several years, ARPA funding, federal funding, this body has done a very good job of, I call it spending money, allocating money, bringing back revenue, or not having revenue go out the door with our income tax and other things. You also need to look at these sheets here, and you need to decide as a body, are we going to be comfortable with a negative number out there? Many people have talked about a precarious position. Senator Blood has talked about it. What fiscal shape are we leaving ourselves in? Part of what the Appropriations Committee does, Senator Clemens does a very good job of this. This budget process, it isn't a one-time thing with a one-issue thing that we deal with. Yes, we deal with them individually, but they are all part of a bigger budget picture. When you look at page 19 of that green book, and it says new general funds transfers in, to get to this 574 million and the 68 million, we are transferring in 70 million from the state unemployment fund. You take that away, you wipe that out, we are 2 years out in the next budget cycle, we're at a negative number. You better be deciding what you want to do with some of these other funds, some of these other bills, because to put us in that position, I don't think that's a position we want to as state legislatures be in. When we talk about the budget, we talk about all of these individual things adding up to a total number, a total dollar amount. Thank you. You need to be aware of and mindful of the bills on the floor, what some of those are going to have a fiscal impact on, what some of those have an appropriation on, but you also need to be very mindful of where this leaves us. That future fund book that Senator Waltz passed out, it does show, though, out there in several years out there, we're still in the $1 billion cash fund. But how are you going to transfer those in or out? So thank you for the discussion. People need to be mindful of how this $70 million impacts the budget, especially in the long term.
Thank you, Senator Dorn. Senator Erdman, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon. I just want to give you a little update on what happened in the rotunda here at 1 o'clock. There's an organization that started No New Taxes in Nebraska. It appears that organization has been set up by Senator Ricketts, and his campaign people are organizing that specifically against epic consumption tax. And I couldn't hear what they had to say, but generally, I've heard what they've always said before, and consequently now they say they have a study. I haven't seen it, but they have been projecting ever since we started that the rate was going to be 22%. And so they've asked the Tax Foundation to come up with some confidential or some, it must be confidential because I've not seen it, information on proving it's going to be 22%. And so they back into what they think the rate should be. So what has happened is we've made tremendous strides with the taxpayers of Nebraska. And there was a poll done about 3 weeks ago that showed 54% of those polled thought epic option was the right thing to do. 30% of those people strongly were in support. 28% were strongly opposed. So we're making great progress. And by the fact that they are throwing this much money at it and they're not organized against it tells me we are on the right track. Because you see, our current tax code is 1,271 pages. And in that 1,271 pages, what we do is we pick winners and losers. And for those of you listening, you are the losers because you don't sit in this body. You're not part of DED, Economic Development, Chamber of Commerce, that you get to pick the winners. They pick the winners and you get to be the loser. And so we have had numerous opposition people come out against the epic option. And I sent an email to Art Laffer, who is the most renowned economist in the nation, about a month ago and told him that when he was in my office, he underestimated who our opposition would be. And he wrote back and said, welcome to the good fight. That's the way it is when you try to represent the people. So that organization out there in the rotunda is one that's representing those who collect and spend the tax dollars. And Epic Option is one that represents the taxpayer. So if you're listening today at home and you understand what I've just said, under the current system, we continue to pick winners and losers, and anything that's coming forward out of this legislature this year will be a reduction, a decrease in the increase. We have not made a reduction that makes a difference to anybody yet, and I don't suppose we will. So if I could have asked a question to that group, I would assume that they would be opposed to the governor's plan because he's going to raise the sales tax from 5.5 to 6.5. So I suppose if they're against no new taxes, they would be also opposed to what Governor Pillen is trying to do. So what you need to understand is this. This is a very important statement. The reason facts don't change most people's opinions is because most people don't use facts to form their opinions. They use their opinions to form their facts. And that's what Open Sky and all those people out in the rotunda had to say today. And consequently, they've taken total disregard for those who pay taxes. And we will continue to fight the fight for those who send us here to make a difference in their life. to make a difference in the way they pay taxes. And by the way, no matter what we do in this body will not make us competitive with any of our surrounding states when it comes to property or income tax. And we will continue to do what we've always done and expect different results. That's what we do here. And
1
so
minute.
it's kind of refreshing to see how much money and effort these people are putting in to be in opposition to the voters. That is amazing to see how much time and effort and what they're willing to go, the length they're willing to take to be against something that's an advantage for the taxpayer. So continue to watch the website, epicoption.org, for any information that will show you why it is an option that you should be in favor of. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Erdman. Mr. Clerk, for an announcement.
Mr. President, the Judiciary Committee will be meeting under the south balcony at 2:00 p.m. Judiciary Committee now under the south balcony.
Returning to the queue, Senator Walls, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good afternoon. Before I start, I did want to just take a minute and congratulate my daughter, Emma, and her new fiance, Austin, on their engagement Monday night. So super, super excited about that. Senator Dorn had mentioned the report that I had laid on your desk provided by the Fiscal Office, and it's called the 2023 Nebraska Long-Term Budget Planning Report. Again, I'm just going to repeat, the Nebraska Long-Term Planning Report. And I think it's a tool that we should be using really to plan the long-term financial health of our state. Honestly, I think that this is one of the most important tools or pieces of information that we should utilize when we are trying to determine our budget and the revenue package. And as I look through this report, honestly, I kind of found it a little bit alarming. As Senator Orr said, this report is based on not making, the report now is based on if we made no changes to anything today, and we projected an average revenue increase growth of 4% and average growth rate of 2.7% per year. The outlook going out 10 years really isn't very rosy. So I was just wondering if I could ask Senator Dorn some questions. I know that he is on the Appropriations Committee and studies this stuff quite a bit. And I just wanted to go through this report kind of page by page and was wondering if you could help me with it. Would you yield to some questions or some help?
Senator Dorn, would you yield to some questions?
Yes, I sure would.
All right.
Okay.
Let's just start on page 1, Senator Dorn. And it looks like in 24-25, we have, we're looking good with about $312 million ending balance.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
But things seem to change when we get to year 25, 26, and 26, 27. Our revenues are actually less than our appropriations in both those years. Can you talk about that just a little bit?
Yes, the first 3 pages in there is basically our fiscal sheet, our balance sheet that we get every day, and it's projecting out what happens through between now and the year 38, 39 or whatever. So it goes into, they have a methodology the fiscal office always uses. They are using approximately a 4.5% growth in revenue. So we are calculating that in there. If that happens, then they are also using, I think if I read it right, about a 2 to 2.3% growth in appropriations in those years. So these numbers here show you, if you look at line 24 on this, that's our ending balance, which is basically what we have to have for the minimum reserve. Then the next line is the excess shortfall from that minimum reserve. We can't go below that ending balance of the minimum reserve. That we are required as a state to do. The next line shows, and as you follow that through, we get up in the $2 billion range shortfall out there near 32, 33, using the methodology that I call it basically past history. We've had We've averaged the last 30 years a 4.8% growth in revenue. So they're going with a less number than that. We
1
have
minute.
also expended more money than what they're using. So this is something to a guide. This is a guide to show you if we use these numbers, this is what'll happen.
Thank you, Senator Dorn. And I think I'll wait for other questions on my next turn up. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Walls. Seeing no one else in the queue, Senator Reapy, you're recognized to close on the motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. We have seeking to find an agreement on terms of some acceptable position, and with that, I would like to yield time to Senator Conrad.
Senator Conrad, you have 4 minutes, 42 seconds.
Very good. Thank you so much, Mr. President. Thank you so much, Senator Reapy. I again want to express my gratitude to my friend, Senator Reapy, for working in collaboration with me to continue to debate on this important measure after an incredibly close vote when the floor amendment was initially under consideration. I think everybody can see the writing on the wall when you look at that vote, when you see how we had multiple supporters that were absent at that moment for different professional and personal reasons. There's no doubt that there's discomfort in the body with moving forward with this proposal as written. I think that I have been assured, and I have trust in my colleagues that we will have a good faith negotiation on this topic, just like the other matters that remain in flux in negotiations related to behavioral health, developmental disabilities, water issues, access to justice issues, et cetera. So I think that the vote itself initially was crystal clear that there is uneasiness in the body, if not a majority of members who want us to revisit this proposal that has emanated from the governor's office and the appropriations committee. I have no doubt that we can do that from general to select without forcing a vote on the reconsideration motion. With that, I yield back the balance of the time to my friend Senator Reapy if he so desires.
Senator Reapy, 2 minutes, 53 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President. Like Senator Conrad, I trust my fellow senators that we'll be able to work something out. I did want to make a quick comment that I know earlier we had a discussion about whether the funds were in a trust fund or whether it was a cashed fund. And I think that we had two different legal opinions. My experience has been is when you get two attorneys in on an issue, you're going to get at least three opinions. So, but at this time, I wish to withdraw my motion for reconsideration.
Without objection, it is withdrawn. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, Senator Jacobson would move to amend the committee amendments with FA 286.
Senator Jacobson, you're recognized to open.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll be very brief. I know we've talked about this before. I've been on the mic and explained what my concerns are. This was $5 million that was going to be removed from the Tourism Commission. I just want to remind everyone that the Tourism Commission is now a 13-member commission that's appointed by the governor. There are currently 7 vacant seats on that commission. The governor has the ability to appoint those positions, and they have to be confirmed by the legislature. And then the commission selects the commission director. The Tourism Commission gets their funding from the occupation tax that are charged by hotels and motels. That occupation tax then comes to the commission, and their purpose is to attract tourism in Nebraska, both internally and externally. Many people have heard about Passport Nebraska. Passport Nebraska is part of one of the programs the Nebraska Tourism Commission conducts. That would be one of the first programs lost if this funding was not there. That's been very successful in keeping people in Nebraska to stay in Nebraska and spend their tourism dollars here. Then you'd go elsewhere around the country and you run ad campaigns with different activities that are going on in Nebraska. We think about what's happening with the new, with the expansion of the outlet center there between Lincoln and Omaha. That too will be an attraction that likely will be promoted by the Tourism Commission to get more people to come to Nebraska, spend their dollars here, both retail dollars and spend dollars in other activities, and stay in our hotels and motels. Hotels and motels are generally full in the summertime, but they're not in the wintertime. So if we can create more activities in the winter months to get people here and staying here when school is in session, those are more dollars that come to our local communities. It's more dollars that go into this fund. So this is critically important. Now, I think the state and DED has a need, and I believe that those dollars will likely be funded out of the budget. I've had conversations with Senator Clements on that, and I'll let him speak to this himself. But this would be the wrong thing to do, to move these dollars away from Tourism Commission. They have a plan for the dollars. They have a need for the dollars. Those of you who didn't like the slogan, Nebraska, it's not for everyone, that program is now ended, and they're now about to begin photo and spending to create the new program. That's what these dollars would also be going towards. So they have a plan for the dollars. The dollars are dollars that are collected by the tourism through these occupation taxes, and they have to come to the Appropriations Committee to get the spending authority, which is what they did again this year. So again, I would encourage your green vote on FA 286 to allow those funds to stay where they are, and that we find funding for DED elsewhere in the budget. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Jacobson. Senator Clements, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to speak in favor of FA 286. In committee, I did vote to transfer the tourism dollars out. And I was in favor of that because the governor does have a proposal that he wants to spend $5 million with DED for a statewide promotion program. I think that's a lot of job development. I'm not sure what else. But I'm going to support keeping the transfer to DED and just transferring this back to the tourism. Would Senator Jacobson yield to a question?
Senator Jacobson, would you yield to some questions?
Yes, I would.
Thank you, Senator Jacobson. You talked about they have plans for the funds, and I haven't heard specific, but I haven't been speaking with the tourism people. Can you be a little more in detail what they might be doing with that?
Sure. I think probably the big thing they've got going right now is you have to build out this photos and build the new campaign for the new state slogan. So that's going to be a significant amount that they're going to spend. They've also gone into other markets, Oklahoma City, Chicago, and others, where they would target advertising for some of the activities here in Nebraska. And the work that they've done on research is that they believe it's about a $27 return for every dollar spent there. The normal return's about $20. And so that work has been done as well. Then you've got all the different campaigns that they typically do now. National Western, they'll sponsor that. They'll sponsor the bus association who brings tour buses across Nebraska. So there's a long list of ongoing things that they do. And then of course, the Passport Nebraska program, very popular program that people are aware of. They spend the dollars for that as well.
Okay, thank you. That is helpful. I know that Director Ricks did in a hearing talk about expanding to Oklahoma City and expanding farther than where they've been able to reach, and that these funds is what he was wanting to do. And I haven't seen details on the governor's program in DED, but I'm going to support continuing the funding in DED and let the tourism, especially because I'm supporting Senator McDonald's bill that will, I don't know if it's passed yet, but it puts a person from the DED director on the Tourism Commission as well as someone from the State Chamber of Commerce. So the DED will have a vote, a voice on how tourism spends this $5 million. And that makes me feel a little bit more comfortable that there is somebody coordinating between the two so they don't duplicate their efforts. And I was thinking that we only needed one person doing all this promotion, but if they can coordinate together and not duplicate, I'll support FA 286. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Clemens. Senator Hansen, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think Senator Jacobson made some good points. I am in favor of his floor amendment. I think for a couple reasons. I still have faith in tourism board for doing what they can to help promote our state. I think they've, I think they're on the upward trend of doing better, I think. We've seen, I still definitely think it's some work as we've been hearing from other people on the floor. I do have a concern about maybe what might happen to the passport program. And if anybody doesn't know, in near Chicama in my district in Burke County, there's a place called Master's Hand. And it's a boutique. All I know is a lot of women like it. They sell the world's best cinnamon bun. They have signs and everything. And I'm not a big cinnamon bun fan, but they're pretty good cinnamon buns. And they sell a ton of them every year, and they sell all kinds of pies, and they have tea parties and all this other kind of stuff. My wife likes to go to it. If that helps you out at all. So they participate in this passport program pretty extensively, and they get people from all over the state that come visit their establishment. And I'd hate to see something happen with that, whether the funding for it or the program itself. So I'd like to see tourism still continue to accomplish the passport program and continue it. So I just want to at least give a shout out to Susie over at Master's Hand. So if anybody's in my district, and Senator Wishart, I don't know if she's on the floor, she knows. You know what I mean? So she knows Burke County very well. Anyone who came, and I'm assuming she's been there. Yes. Okay. Yes. I get the nod, like, of course. So if anybody gets a chance to visit them, a very nice lady who runs that place and a very nice establishment. So thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hansen. Senator Vargas, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you very much. I rise in, well, I'm still listening to people. Originally I was really pushing for trying to make this offset in committee. And part of the reason is, well, two reasons. One, I think that there has been a lot of different opinions on our current work for tourism across the state. And second, there's a new initiative within DED to increase tourism and, with a different slogan, with a different emphasis. I don't think anything that people have said are incorrect. There's a need within tourism. There are certain initiatives moving forward, but tourism did request increased authority to spend this year. We didn't give them the authority. There are extra funds in this cash fund that are not being utilized. And so part of the impetus in the conversation, and one of the things I said is we should be creative to make sure that we're not growing our general fund obligations and growing our budget, and using excess tourism cash fund dollars for economic related tourism reasons like DED sounds like a very plausible, a very good pragmatic use of those funds. That was the reason behind it. If the body doesn't want to do that, and I had this conversation with our chair, we will have to figure out a way to find the $5 million in general funds from someplace else. We'll work on that. But for everybody in this room, please be a very watchful eye on our tourism dollars to make sure that there's a real economic impact for bringing new individuals into our state. This is also tourism for Omaha and Lincoln, but I think it's tourism for the entire state. And also making sure that this new initiative, the $5 million that the governor is requesting, is effective. I think it can be, but we need to make sure to hold both accountable to sort of meeting the needs. I think there's sort of unilateral agreement that the previous campaign, it didn't really muster up the sort of potential that people really received it well. And so as a result, we're currently in this scenario to fund a new initiative that focuses a little bit differently on a different messaging and slogan, or continuing funding the Tourism Commission. Again, that's funded through those fees from the lodging tax. So it has a sustainable resource. The question is whether or not their plan and what they plan to use it for is sound, and we support those efforts. As a committee, we did not say yes to giving them more authority to spend. So we weren't yet convinced. I'm looking at some of my committee members. We had that conversation. We were not convinced. We did not appropriate more funds. So for a future next year, it is going to be incumbent on the next appropriations committee and this body to make sure that those tourism dollars in that fund are really going to the best possible projects, the best possible ways to bring tourism. It's what they're intended for, and I want to make sure it's used for that reason. It's a huge opportunity. I do trust our tourism commissioners in getting that job done, but we weren't yet convinced on the overall plan for the excess dollars. So this was trying to be very, very creative. So if you support the amendment, we will figure out how to find $5 million for Good Life is Calling sort of greater DED campaign. I did have that conversation with Chairman Clements. So it's completely up to you. But this is the way of us trying to make sure that not we're only balancing the budget, but we're using dollars for the intended purpose in other places for similar intended purpose. With that, just want to give you the bit of background and let you know.
Thank you, Senator Vargas. Senator McDonald, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, colleagues. Earlier, Senator Jacobson and Senator Clements were having a discussion about the tourism and what we had talked about earlier in the year with the DED director and someone appointed by the governor to go to add to that 11 people up to 13 people that would be appointed by the governor, then approved by the legislature. That was approved by and signed by the governor on March 11th of this year. So appreciate the support during that process, and just to make sure everybody's on the same page with what was being discussed earlier. That was signed by the governor on March 11th, 2024. So thank you all.
Thank you, Senator McDonald. Senator Armendariz, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thought I would jump on and give a little bit of background and echo Senator Vargas's words and thoughts about why we thought to transition this. My thoughts were, after thorough questioning by the agency, or to the agency, that I just lacked the confidence that they would judiciously spend this money. I asked some poignant questions. The tax they're collecting at the hotels, could you tell me how many, if that did increase, how many of those visitors at our Nebraska hotels were from out of state? That should be our goal. We're attracting people outside of Nebraska, not just us Nebraskans moving around Nebraska. We want outside dollars coming into Nebraska as well. There wasn't an answer to that. They hadn't done that work to figure out how many outside dollars were passing in through Nebraska, which was concerning to me. We also pressed them on how they're advertising our fishing and gaming. There weren't any good answers for that either, which arguably is probably our best assets that we should be advertising. And there was lack of any information on how they would promote our state in that way. So I would say fundamentally our committee just lacked the confidence that they were able to really promote our state in the way we want it promoted, bringing in more tourism from other states. And that's why we made the decision we did. I do understand that the board has been expanded a little bit to provide a little more oversight. So I may allow them another chance to see if they can dive a little deeper in how we bring outside dollars into the state through tourism. But I wanted to give everybody the background on what the committee was thinking when we wanted to shift those dollars away, hopefully getting them spent a little bit more toward what we were trying to achieve in tourism here. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Armendariz. Seeing no one else in the queue, Senator Jacobson, you're recognized to close on the floor amendment.
Yeah, Mr. President, I'll be very brief here. I really appreciate Senator Armendariz's comments, and she and I talked about this off the floor here yesterday. And I take those comments to heart. I have visited with the folks with the tourism, particularly at the county level, and some that have been involved at the state level. And they do have that information, but I can't explain what happened in the hearing. But clearly that needs to be done better. I can assure you there is a plan, and I think the fact that there's 6 vacancies on the board right now, on the commission right now, those vacancies need to get filled. The governor needs to fill those with people he has confidence in. And then, as Senator Clements mentioned, part of the bill with the inheritance tax bill would be to add DED and someone from state chamber on this board as well. So we have the coordination, but this board is entirely appointed by the governor. And so he has an opportunity to fill it with his people and people that he has confidence in to do the kinds of things that we want done here in Nebraska. And keep in mind that what's happening at DED is really business attraction, retaining and attracting businesses to Nebraska. Tourism is focused on bringing tourists to Nebraska. And then also the only comment I'd make on, and clarification I'd make on Senator Armendariz's comments is we also want people that are going on vacation to consider vacationing in Nebraska and keeping those dollars in the state rather than thinking they have to go to Wyoming or they have to go someplace out of state. So keeping in-state dollars here are also important, and that's part of what they're doing, and Passport Nebraska, of course, leads heavily into that. So I do have confidence that this can get done. I understand the concerns the committee had. I appreciate the willingness to maybe give them another year to show that they can make a difference, and let's get that board fully appointed so that we're fully staffed there as well, and then they can make the decisions they need to make. So with that, I would encourage your green vote on FA 286. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Jacobson. Members, the question is the adoption of FA 286. All those in favor, vote aye. All those opposed, vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
43 ayes, no nays, Mr. President, on adoption of the amendment.
FA 286 is adopted. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, some items quickly, if I could. Communication from the governor concerning the withdrawal of consideration of confirmation of Dr. John L. Keene from the State Board of Health. Additionally, appointment from the governor communication from the governor concerning the appointment of Michael Durenin to the Racing and Gaming Commission. New LR 324 from Senator Conrad that'll be referred to the Executive Board. Notice of hearing from the Business and Labor Committee. As it concerns LB 1413, Mr. President, Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, I have FA 275 and FA 279, both with notes that you wish to withdraw. In that case, Mr. President, Senator Michaela Cavanaugh would move to amend with FA 277.
Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized to open.
Thank you, Mr. President, colleagues. I think some of us are scrambling a bit. That announcement was a little out of, at least for me, out of nowhere, but message from the governor. Former Senator Keene has served on the Board of Health, and he has been, he's the veterinarian. You have to have different categories of people on the Board of Health, and he's been the veterinarian since, I think, since I've been here. So whatever the reasons are, thank you, Senator Keene, for your service to the state as both a senator and a member of the Board of Health. Floor Amendment 277 strikes Section 8. And then there's one more amendment, I think it's 278, which will strike Section 7. I probably should have done them in the opposite order, but that's all right. So these are the two housing reallocations. Probably could have done them together, actually, now that I think about it. Strike 7 and 8. So basically, just going back to what we already had from last year's budget in the housing and not taking the money away from the urban affordable housing. Now, I personally am a supporter of giving money to the rural workforce housing. But we had that in the budget last year. It was vetoed, and this body chose not to override it. So I find it to be a bit disingenuous that we are then going back and taking $20 million away from the urban housing. And if we want to do affordable housing for the rural workforce, we should find the money for that, not on the backs of the urban housing. The urban housing money is really needed. And again, as we've talked about other cash funds and things being allocated, that money was allocated and people start planning for it. And if we're going to keep taking money from projects, changing our mind from year to year, we're going to have a hard time building any sort of progress in this state or continuity. And we're going to have a hard time getting people and companies to want to invest in these things and apply for these things if they might lose the funding the very next year because we just changed our minds. Our votes should be serious, and I think that they are. And we chose last year to put forward these two housing, the governor / the rural housing, and this body chose not to override that. If this body has changed its mind about funding rural housing, great, I'm here for it, but not at the expense of urban housing. So if we remove Section 8 and we want to leave Section 7 in, that's terrific. We could do that. We don't actually have to. So I guess maybe it was a good thing it went this way. We can do Section 8 and I can pull the next amendment. If we adopt Section 8, pull the next amendment, rural gets their 20 million, urban goes back to what it was already supposed to be, and we call it a day. Because that's all I've got left on this bill. And I think I'm the only one that has anything left on this bill. So we call it a day. Sound good? Sounds good to me. And with that, I think I will yield the remainder of my time. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Dover, you're recognized to speak.
I don't know why I'm up. I yield my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Dover. Senator Clemens, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I stand opposed to FA 277. If you look in your gold book, the governor's proposal, the committee did approve that transfer. It's on page 62. The starting balance for this fiscal year is $36.2 million in affordable housing. Their balance in the last 5 years has gone from 14.9 to 16.9 to 23 to 31 to 36 million. It has not been fully spent. The transfer $25 million, and 20 of it to rural housing and 5 million to middle housing, still leaves $5.4 million in the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. The Affordable Housing Trust Fund has a revenue source. It's from documentary stamp tax on transfers of real estate deeds. And the amount of revenue, it's been 16.3, 16.8, over $16 million a year will be added to this. This transfer takes the balance at the end of the next fiscal year. There's nothing coming out here in this fiscal year before June 30th of this year. It'll be by June 30th of 2025 would be the $25 million transfer. Still would leave $5.4 million. And then the following year, they'll get $16 million more from the documentary stamp tax. Would put them back up to $21 million for the following year, where they've been spending 9, 10, maybe projecting $15 million. And so this would leave them $21 million of yet to spend on affordable housing. The rural workforce housing dollars, this is the $20 million that we're allocating, has been fully spent in recent years. It's all contracted out. And in checking with the Middle Income Housing Fund, they have not spent all of that. There's $1.5 million left that they didn't have contracts for. I don't know if they didn't have requests, but they didn't approve requests. They're left over with $1.5 million yet. This would add $5 million to the middle income. We didn't see in testimony requesting middle income housing. In the committee, we did change the governor's recommendation from all rural workforce to 20 million rural and 5 million middle income to support that fund somewhat, but we had very little testimony, and that I recall that the middle income was important. We had a lot of builders and realtors talking about wanting the rural workforce housing and how well it's been done, and it's fully utilized. So I support just leaving the budget transfers the way they are, and oppose FA 277. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Clemens. Senator Walz, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I do have a couple questions for Senator Vargas, if he would yield.
Senator Vargas, would you yield to some questions?
Okay. Yep, happy to.
Thank you, Senator Vargas. So I was just wondering if you could talk about the hearing and why the decision was made to take money from the middle income urban housing funds and provide more money to the rural housing fund.
Yeah, I will try to explain it because that's not exactly correct. So there's an Affordable Housing Trust Fund that is funded by a doc stamp tax. That fund has been growing. It's got more than $45 million in it, something around that, and somebody will correct me. It gets out about 12 to 16 million every single year in funds for affordable housing projects across the state. That is one program. There's two other programs, two workforce housing programs, one that's a rural workforce housing and one that we'll just call urban workforce housing. It's called middle income. Both of those are for workforce housing, a different sort of tranche of housing. There was not enough support in committee to fund from general funds for new housing programs. Maybe on the floor there is, and I would love that because I'm a proponent of housing in this way. What we did have support in the committee was utilizing some of the additional funds in the Affordable Housing Trust Fund that have not been used or could sustain and transferring it over to both of these other funds. I don't like taking the money from one housing fund for another housing fund, personally. But given that there was general support to move that to rural workforce housing, I was trying my best to find some equity in getting funds to both workforce housing programs. I think these need dedicated sources. I think we need to fund more in them. As you heard, actually, the committee had overwhelmingly one full day of support for all of these housing programs, not just one. The Chamber of Commerce, the bankers, the Lincoln and Omaha chambers, the small business, so many different entities came in support of all of these housing programs and new general funds. I think we should do that, but there wasn't enough appetite in the committee. And if we can get that appetite on the floor, 100%. But insofar as we find that, I still want to make sure that we are funding some equity to urban, middle-income workforce housing and the rural workforce housing. I'm not necessarily against Senator Kavanaugh's amendment. I'm only against it right now, but unless we find another way to fund housing. But know this, by next year, there will be new money coming from the dock stamp tax to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund to fund the existing projects in the Affordable Housing Trust Fund.
Okay, and then just one other thing I wanted to ask you, because from what I understand, all of the money that was dedicated to urban housing funds were not used. Is that correct?
So all of the funds have been utilized in the rural workforce housing, and nearly all the funds have been utilized in the middle income urban workforce housing. There's only about $1 million left, $1.5 million. They just awarded about $6-7 million, I think. So there's not enough to really make an impact. Both of these programs are effective and are working, and we've seen them work. And so that was the impetus behind supporting both the programs. We just didn't have enough support to give more funding to both the programs.
Okay, and then just one more question. So you would be in favor of
1 minute.
making these two funds more equitable through some type of an amendment?
Yeah, I mean, I personally would. I can't speak for the committee. I'd also be supportive of just putting more funding to both of them, general funds or cash reserve funds. I think they're really good programs. And more importantly, we have a housing crisis. We don't have enough housing stock in both rural and in urban Nebraska. And this is a way of making sure we're meeting that unmet need.
All right. Thank you, Senator Vargas.
No problem.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senators Walz and Vargas. Senator Erdman, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just visited with Senator McDonald. I told him it would be inappropriate that I let an opportunity go by to talk about how much I hate workforce and all kinds of affordable housing that the government builds. It's another opportunity for us to pick winners and losers. If you happen to be one of those people that's chosen to get one of these workforce houses, you win the lottery, especially if you're in that group that the contractor gets gap money to buy the price down from 280 to 200, you're a winner. If you aren't, you're a loser. So I was at a quandary when voting on this transfer because I don't think it's appropriate that the government build one house, not one. I can't figure out where they have that found in the Constitution that it's the government's obligation to provide housing. And the reason we do that is because it's not economically feasible to do it for a private corporation or a contractor, so the government does it. And when the bankers came in that were in support of workforce housing, I said, you should be opposed to this because they're taking away an opportunity for you to loan money to build houses. But the answer that I concluded that the bankers said it's too risky for us, that's why we don't want to make a loan to these people, let the government do it. So the government makes a 2% loan, and then they get a tax incentive from the federal government, 4 to 9% to build workforce housing. And then they build it with TIF financing, and then they get the bonded indebtedness from the TIF bond for 20 years. And the poor sucker that lives in the house pays the taxes, and it goes directly to the person who owns a TIF bond. It is an opportunity for those building houses, and I told the committee that when I leave here, I'm going to start a 501(c) and see if I can't set up my own construction company that can take advantage of all these tax incentives. And so if you're listening today back home or out there on the TV, you'll understand that's what we do here. We continually pick winners and losers, and this programs, all three of these, are exactly that. And so we have a business out in Kimball that's going to expand called Clean Harbors, and those people, that corporation, has purchased land. They're going to subdivide it. They're going to build houses there for their employees. That's how you do it. But if it was economically feasible, some contractor would be building these houses and selling them, but it's not. And so it's okay for the government to lose money because it's not the government's money, it's your money. And so they are willing to gamble with your money, but they don't want to gamble with their own if they're a banker. So all of these opportunities that we have for workforce housing is peculiar to me. And so I would be remiss if I didn't stand up and say something about workforce, affordable, or middle income, or whatever other definition you want to use for housing the government builds. For the life of me, I don't understand why we continue to do what we do, which makes your taxes higher, because somebody has to make up the difference because it's not economically feasible to build these houses. So I did vote for this transfer because I was kind of trapped. If I left the money in there, one would not get some, because you see affordable housing gets a contribution from the dock stamp on an annual basis, and the other two do not. And so we have to make transfers into those other two to make them whole, to keep them functioning. So I just wish it would all go away. So we'll see what happens. I'm not in favor of FA 277, but that's Senator Kavanaugh's idea. We'll see what happens when we get ready to vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Erdman. Senator Armendariz, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. As I mentioned yesterday, I am not a fan of government interference in the housing market. I think it artificially inflates housing prices. I don't remember if I voted for this or not. I probably did not. I wish we didn't fund any of it. Quick Google search of housing availability, and we were told over and over again for the last two sessions, housing under $300,000, just not there. So I am an avid hobbyist of houses. So I am on looking at houses almost every day. Did a quick Google search of how many houses are available in Douglas County, under $300,000. There are over 1,200 houses available in Douglas County under $300,000 right now. So then I was told that there were only 6 houses available in Grand Island. Do the same Google search. There are 93 houses under $300,000 available in Hall County. And just to do a third, I did Madison County, Senator Dover sitting next to me, and there are 71 houses available in Madison County. They seem to be all representative populations available. I just don't get why the government interferes in housing. It artificially inflates the housing prices. It sets us up for a dangerous fall. Somebody will have to really compel me to agree that is the right thing to do, is prop up housing with government funds. I'm not for this motion or changing any of it. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Armendariz. Senator Jacobson, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, Senator Erdman raised some questions, and Senator Armendariz kind of chimed in on this. So I feel like somebody needs to get up and defend rural affordable housing or rural workforce housing needs. I know that you can go out on the internet and pull up how many houses are for sale. I would encourage you to go look at those houses, okay? Because I can show you some places that need to be demolished that are a house. They're out there. If you go out and start looking at most houses that aren't selling, they aren't selling because they're horrible inside, and in order for them to be inhabited, you have major remodeling costs to bring them up to standards. If you move across rural Nebraska, there is a huge housing shortage. I can tell you that in North Platte, for example, 875 jobs for sustainable beef that will need to come online 1 year from now. We don't have anywhere close to the number of houses that we need to accommodate that. When you look at what it costs to build today, if you don't have existing homes out there, you have to build new homes. Now, any realtor will tell you that when you build a new home, you're not building new homes necessarily for the people that are coming in on a low income. You're probably going to build homes that people will move up to, and their home becomes available and it becomes affordable. People that say you don't need subsidies to do it, then I would tell you, if there's so much money in it, form your LLC, go out to the rural areas and start building houses if there's so much money to be made in that business. Because the fact of the matter, it is not. The reason we have tax increment financing is to encourage people to come out and build homes and be able to bend the cost curve. If you do economic development, and I've been a banker for 46 years, and I can tell you that when you have economic development, it starts with quality jobs. You've got to find a place to house people. When they move to your town, they pay sales tax, they pay income tax, they pay personal property taxes. All of those things. They visit your grocery stores. They do all of the other things that build your economy. That's why you do it. That's why the government gets involved. Because if you cannot get this to start out and you can't build these houses, you'll never get employers to come to your town, you'll never create economic activity, and you'll slowly die. We learned in Bennington that they've got so many people moving to Bennington in homes there, and now they don't have room in their school system, so they tried to float a bond issue that failed on a new school. Their mill levy is already over 3. Well, I can tell you in North Platte, our consolidated mill levy is 1.96. And it's going down because of the growth that we've had here in the last couple of years, in the last few years, and the growth that we see coming forward. But the only way that's going to continue is if we can build enough housing stock to get there. There's a lot of pieces that goes into being able to drive that cost curve down to get people in those homes. So economic development begins with housing and good jobs. The higher the cost, the higher value of the job, if you can move a job to $80,000 to $100,000 a year, I got it. You don't need the subsidy. They can come in and build those homes and go. But when you're talking about $50,000 a year jobs, that's a whole different program. And that's what's going to take to build, to staff sustainable beef. And what will happen with that packing plant will move the revenue up for ranchers and cattle producers and everyone in the region, and it'll raise that economic activity. It will help our schools. It will help our tax base. That's why we do it. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Jacobson. Senator Dover, you're recognized to speak.
I'd just like to speak to this kind of the topic right now, I guess, that people are discussing. And I first got my real estate license in 1983. We have a construction land development company, and I've watched housing triple over the years, according to what we used to build houses for. And to answer the question of should government money be spent to subsidize housing, I would say that depends. And I'd say I would say thank you very much to those who've kind of designed these programs over the years, because they've come a long, long way. Because I remember back when they took tax dollars, gave it to people to build a house, never expecting that money to be returned. And I'd say this is, I do not think that government money should be spent and given to someone to purchase a house. Let's just say, I guess I'll talk about a bill I have is, so I have a 25-cent increase in dock stamps. And that would cost, a $1 million home costs about $250. But over 10 years, conservatively, that generates in a revolving fund somewhere between $50 and $60 million available for down payment assistance. And if you ask, I would say most lenders, what's the best bang for your buck? Because I think that's our responsibility. If we are taking tax dollars, are we making sure that gets to those buyers? And when they do get in a house and they move on, are we recapturing that money for that next home buyer that say is at 100% of median income, as is in my bill? So I am appreciative of the way that we do fund now the revolving funds, and we're recapturing that money. So I do think that's okay. I do believe the problem we have is twofold. It's affordable housing, and it's also housing stock, the numbers. I think almost the best bang for your dollar really is rehabbing those houses that are currently there that are in need of fixing up or whatever it may be. I think that's probably the best use for taxpayer dollars. But then if you have the problem that you just don't have enough, take care of the stock that you have. But we need to build more stock in housing, because it's kind of a chicken egg where you have to have a job to sell a house, and you have to have a house to sell to fill the job. So I do think at some level that funding is necessary. But I do think that we need to recover those funds. And I do think a sustainable funding source is critical. Obviously, some of this was funded through ARPA, but ARPA is not, after this session, I don't think we'll be addressing ARPA anymore. So again, I do think we need to do something, be wise steward of the money. But upon sale of that equity should not be taken along with it. We should not give, say, someone $30,000 to help them build a house. Then they sell their house and they take that $30,000 with them. No, that should be recaptured and cycled into, again, people of lower income. And I yield the remainder of my time to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Dover. Senator McKinney, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in sort of support for Senator Kavanaugh's floor amendment 277. I had some conversations with her. She's probably going to bring another one. But overall, I do think we need to make sure that we equitably give out funding for housing in rural workforce housing and middle income workforce housing. As I said the other day, yesterday, historically, if we go with this and give 20 million to rural and 5 to urban, there is going to be a substantial difference, about $42 million difference historically. I'm not saying that rural shouldn't get money. I'm not saying middle should get more. I'm just saying let's make sure that it's equitable. And I know some people might think that we shouldn't give money to programs and things like this, but I think we should, if housing is such of a crisis for our state and people are having a hard time buying homes, hard time building homes, hard time finding people to build those homes, we need to do all that we can as a state and prioritize housing in the right way, which means we should be giving equitable resources to both funds. I know it's not perfect, and I would wish that the difference wasn't as big as it is, but that's neither here or there. But we do have an opportunity to balance it out. If there's $25 million for housing, just split it in half. I don't think that should be an issue, especially when there's data that shows that rural has received more. I'm not talking about affordable housing. I am talking about rural workforce housing and middle income workforce housing. There's 3 housing pots of money I'm specifically talking about, well, probably 4 if you add in the federal dollars, but I'm talking about between rural workforce housing and middle income workforce housing, there's a substantial difference in the amount of dollars that this body has committed to those funds. And all I'm asking, and all I think everybody should be supportive of, is making sure that if we're dedicating $25 million to housing this year, regardless of how you feel about housing or where the money should go, let's just make sure it's equitable in the best way possible, and making sure that 12.5 million goes to rural and 12.5 goes to middle income workforce housing. I don't think that's too much of an ask. I really don't. I think we talk about all the work that's being done and all the time that is being spent on these bills. We waste a lot of time because we have a hard time just doing the right thing. We waste a lot of time because we don't want to upset somebody or hurt somebody's feelings. But if the right thing upsets somebody, then they just have to be upset. If the right thing goes opposite of how somebody thinks something should happen, then so be it. It's the right thing. You were elected to represent the people of your districts. I'll repeat that again. When you ran for office, you were elected to represent the people of your districts, not anybody else. Your people, your constituents. So in saying that, we should be taking votes for the people of Nebraska, not anybody else. The people of Nebraska put you in office. They voted for you. They trusted you to come down here to do the work for the people. So let's make sure we take care of the people in rural communities and urban communities. And let's fund rural workforce housing the same as we would fund middle income workforce housing this year. And with that, I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator McKinney. Senator Erdman, you're recognized to speak.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. President. Senator McKinney, I agree with you about doing the right thing, being sent here to represent those people who sent us here. That's what I've tried to do. So Senator Dover wants to raise, or his idea is to raise the dock stamp by 25 cents. I'm opposed to that. So I don't believe his bill is going to make it out of committee, but I'm opposed to that. So let me follow up a little bit on my comment earlier about starting a business to build workforce and affordable and middle income housing. There's a gentleman that shows up in appropriations every year. I won't mention his name, but he's building 92 houses right now, taking advantage of the workforce housing, low income, middle income, rural, whatever. He's making a significant amount of money doing that. It's quite obvious he is, or he wouldn't continue to do that year after year after year. And I won't mention his name, but I appreciate his, what shall I say, creativity to figure out how to gain the system. And that's exactly what that is. And so it's obvious that it's not economically feasible, or somebody would be building these houses besides those who get incentives. So I would take exception to the fact that you don't make any money by building those houses, because this gentleman seems to be doing quite well. So take that for what it's worth. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Erdman. Seeing no one else in the queue, Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized to close on the floor amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, colleagues, it's an Irish miracle. I don't know. I have realized that my two remaining amendments, this one and the next one, have some technical issues. So I'm going to redraft one amendment for select file, and I'm going to pull everything remaining, and we're going to vote on the budget. Yay! So thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Clerk, I would like to pull my amendment and all remaining amendments and motions. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Cavanaugh. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, Senator Cavanaugh withdrawing FA 277 as well as 278. She would also withdraw MO 1249 and 1248.
Without objection, those are withdrawn.
I have nothing further on the bill, Mr. President.
Members, the question is the adoption of AM 2698. And Senator Clemens to close. Senator Clemens, you're recognized to close.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a second. My main close on this is going to be vote green, but I'd like to just do a refresher on what we're voting on. This is the second budget bill, second bill of two bills that we have in the budget, and which is transferring money, transferring funds, and authorizing expenses from the cash reserve. And we advanced this amendment 9-0 out of committee, and it has a number of bills in it that you can see in the committee statement. The funds transfers, we've talked a lot about those, and the let's see here, the ending balance, the forecasting board, ending balance in the cash reserve is going up to 904 million, mainly because of the $50 million of new revenue, forecasted revenue from the forecasting board. And so I'm pleased to say that the cash reserve is fully funded. Some people have been concerned about revenues falling. The forecasting board for the next 2 years is still optimistic and increasing the revenues slightly. They have been stable, and these transfers also do help with the funding of the budget and the governor's overall program that we're going to be hearing more about in the future. So I thank you for the discussion. I thank you to the Appropriations Committee and the Fiscal Office. And I'd ask for your green vote on AM 2698. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Clemens. Members, the question is the adoption of AM 2698. All those in favor, vote aye. All those opposed, vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
39 ayes, 1 nay, Mr. President, on adoption of the committee amendments.
AM 2698 is adopted. Mr. Clerk.
I have nothing further on the bill, Mr. President.
Members, the question is to advance LB 1413 to ENR initial. All those in favor, vote aye. All those opposed, vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
37 ayes, 5 nays, Mr. President, on advancement of the bill.
LB 1413 advances to ENR initial. Mr. Speaker, for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. President. We will be passing over LB 1188 at the request of the introducer and moving on to consent calendar. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Speaker Arch. Senator Ibaugh has a guest under the south balcony, her husband Greg. Please stand and be recognized by the Nebraska Legislature. Mr. Clerk, items for the record.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members to be printed, Senator Repeat to LB 1188. New LR, Senator Dungan LR 325. That'll be referred to the Executive Board, as well as LR 326 from Senator McKinney. That'll be laid over. Mr. President, as it concerns the agenda, General File Legislative Bill 926, introduced by Senator Aguilar. It's a bill for an act related to museums, changes provisions of the Museum Property Act and repeals the original section. Bill was read for the first time on January 4th of this year and referred to the General Affairs Committee. That committee placed the bill on general file. There are no committee amendments. There is an additional amendment, Mr. President.
Senator Aguilar, you're recognized to open.
Thank you, Mr. President and members. Today, I'm introducing Legislative Bill 926. This legislation modernizes Nebraska's museums' method of communication in notifying the public regarding undocumented items and unclaimed loans. It also changes the time frame to retain all records from 3 years to 25 years to meet the American Alliance of Museums required elements of collections documentation and records to guide museums who they may not have a collections or management policy. Modes of communications have changed significantly, and notifying the public regarding undocumented items and unclaimed loans need to reflect that. A museum may require title to undocumented property held by the museum for at least 7 years. After the 7 years, the museum may advertise said item to be claimed by owner or other legal interests. This legislation would change the time frame for advertising from 3 years to 1 year. This would make it easier for museums to treat, research, exhibit, or rehome these items in a timelier manner. And with updated advertising options, 1 year is sufficient. This in turn would help museums with their problem of overcrowding of property. In the original bill introduced, we proposed to change the method of advertising by adding 2 new ways of notice to be given with publication online on the museum's website or by display in a public area of the museum. The Press Association was in opposition to this, and we worked out an amendment to satisfy both the museum's efforts and the Press Association's opposition. In proposed amendment 2904, a new language states a publication notice would be put into a newspaper in both the county where the museum is located and the county of the lender's or claimant's address, if any, to refer to a posting online on the museum's website for a minimum of 3 consecutive weeks. Due to the overwhelming inventory of items, this would alleviate the impossible high financial cost of posting individual items in newspapers. It has been nearly 30 years since the Nebraska Museums Property Act was enacted. Language in the original act and changes over the past 30 years have made it impossible for many of the Nebraska museums to comply with the law. The changes that are being proposed will rectify that situation and allow our museums to comply with the law and thrive in managing their collections. I have covered the proposed bill and proposed amendment in this introduction and request a yes vote on both of them. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Senator Aguilar. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, Senator Aguilar would move to amend with AM 2904.
Senator Aguilar, you're recognized to open.
As I previously stated, I just discussed 2904 and what it would do, and I asked for your green vote on that as well.
Thank you, Senator Aguilar. Seeing no one else in the queue, you're recognized to close and waive closing. Members, the question is the adoption of AM 2904. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
43 ayes, no nays, Mr. President, on adoption of the amendment.
AM 2904 is adopted.
I have nothing further on the bill, Mr. President.
Seeing no one else in the queue, Senator Aguilar, you're recognized to close and waive closing. Members, the question is the advancement of LB 926 to E&R initial. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
42 ayes, no nays, Mr. President, on advancement of the bill.
LB 926 advances to E&R initial. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, General File Legislative Bill 880, introduced by Senator Hughes. It's a bill for enacting the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. Changes the requirement relating to the Land Acquisition and Source Water Loan Fund, harmonized provisions, repeals the original section. Bills read for the first time on January 3rd of this year and referred to the Natural Resources Committee. That committee placed the bill on general file. There are no committee amendments, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Senator Hughes, you're recognized to open.
Thank you, Mr. President. LB 880 makes a technical amendment to the Clean Water and Drinking Water State Revolving Fund statute. Specifically, LB 880 strikes two references to the Nebraska Department of Health and Human Services in the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund Act. When LB 148 was passed in 2021, the administration of the Public Water System Supervision Program delegated to the state of Nebraska by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency switched from DHHS to the Nebraska Department of Environment and Energy. LB 880 simply removes obsolete language from statute. LB 880 was introduced on January 3rd, 2024, a hearing held on January 24th of 2024. The bill was reported to general file on February 27th by a vote of 8-0 by the members of the Natural Resource Committee. LB 880 has no fiscal note and has had no opposition during its hearing or in any online comments. I urge you to vote green to advance LB 880 to select file. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hughes. Senator Hunt, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, colleagues. I have letters on my desk with 5 signatures to take all of the bills off of consent calendar from the senators that flipped their vote on my veto override. I still don't know what I'm going to do with the rest of those letters. A lot of, I really see it both ways. A lot of people are telling me, you really have no choice. But what I think, if I'm going to share what I really think myself, is, 3 or 4 years ago or more, that would have been par for the course. It would have been very normal for people to experience some kind of retaliation for lying, for backstabbing, for, it's one thing to be like Senator Cowth or Senator Merman, and you just say you don't like the bill. That's what you ought to do, is get on the mic and say, I don't support the bill. Here's why I don't support it. I think it does this and that. And I'm wrong, but this is what I think, and so I'm not going to support it. That's fine with me. People like Senator Ballard or Senator Slama, I knew all along that they didn't support it. We're good. That's fine. The problem isn't that you didn't support my bill. The problem is when you come into my office and say things like, I'm just trying to play the game. I'm just trying to play the right game. Because you should know this game is for 2 players, and I can play games with you right back. So don't play games with me and think that's not going to come back to you. That's the kind of thing that 3 or 4 years ago, you would have gotten retaliation for that. I've heard worse things from some of you that flipped your votes, that you said to others that I'm not going to say because then that'll burn the person that told me. But I know from your own words, to say nothing of the governor's words, that this vote for many of you was completely political. And I can play politics too, or I can rise above and be the bigger person, as I have been for the last 43 days. And what has that gotten me? What has that gotten any of us? You guys don't understand how hard it is for a progressive to get a bill on consent calendar at all. Not just this year, but traditionally forever. You don't know how hard it is for us to get a win on anything at all. And you don't appreciate that, and you've gotten way too comfortable with things going back to business as usual. We can have what happened earlier this week happen, and now we sail through the rest of the agenda like it's no problem. The time is going to come where you need to pay. And it might not be from me. You might not even know it's happening, but all of you are going to pay for that. And the time is also going to come when we have to come collect on that wrong. And you're going to have to give us something. It's not a win for anyone to come sit in my office and say, but I do support the bill. I do know it's a good idea. I voted for it for 3 rounds. Well, at the end of the day, there was only one vote that mattered, wasn't it? It wasn't a gift to me. It doesn't get you closer to heaven. And it's not a win for us to say that we got it through select. We got it through final. We got 25 votes. You think you're handing out scraps to us and we'll take it. We won't anymore. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hunt. Senator Kavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I signed those letters. I signed those letters without even a thought to it. I signed them without even looking at what the bills were, because it didn't matter. I have been in here, this is, I don't know what year for me, 6 years. This is my 6th year. And I have been punished by the body time and time and time again for doing my job. I have been taught lessons in here over and over again. I have been screwed over by people in this body and previous bodies many times over. But I never screwed people over, ever. And I agree, there is a price to pay. And I'm fine with Senator Hunt not making you pay that price today, but what you did was disruptive to the integrity of this institution and shows me and others that you cannot be trusted, you are not a person of your word, you lack integrity, and you are a pawn for the governor in this body. And you need to learn that being a pawn for the governor in this body is not going to get you far enough. It's not going to get you where you want to be. Because every single person in here needs every single person in here at some time or another. Period. So when you fail the body like you did on Tuesday, you did not fail Senator Hunt, you failed all of us. You failed all of us. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Hughes, you're recognized to close. She waived closing. Members, the question is to advance LB 880 to E&R initial. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
39 ayes, 2 nays on advancement of the bill, Mr. President.
LB 880 advances to E&R initial. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, next item on the agenda, Legislative Bill 1167, introduced by Senator DeBoer. This bill for enacting criminal procedure provides a deadline for arraignment of individuals arrested without a warrant, eliminates obsolete provisions, harmonized provisions, and repeals the original section. The bill was read for the first time on January 11th of this year and referred to the Judiciary Committee. That committee placed the bill on general file with committee amendments, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Senator DeBoer, you're recognized to open.
Good afternoon, colleagues. I'm proud to be introducing today LB 1167 as amended by the White Copy Amendment AM 2829. I want to first thank the Judiciary Committee for voting out the bill and for the Speaker for placing it on consent calendar. LB 1167 was heard in the Judiciary Committee on February 1st this year with no opposition testimony and was advanced from the Judiciary Committee on March 7th. LB 1167 makes it clear that when an individual is arrested via a warrantless arrest, so think a traffic stop which leads to a drug discovery, that individual shall have their initial appearance in the courtroom within 7 days of the arrest if they remain in custody the entire 7 days. This bill has been worked on with stakeholders, including in order to ensure the practicability of this bill, including, and I think this is really important, adding in the provision that this initial appearance can be done via video conferencing. These initial appearances could be an arraignment, it could be a transfer hearing, it could be something like a bond hearing. So if you have any questions, colleagues, I would be happy to answer them, but I appreciate your green vote on AM 2829 and LB 1167. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator DeBoer. As stated, there is a committee amendment. Senator Wayne, you're recognized to open.
Thank you, Mr. President. LB 1167 was heard on by the Judiciary February 1st, 2024. The committee vote was 7-0 with one person present not voting to AM 2829 in advance to general file. AM 2829 replaces the original bill. The amendment would change section 29-404.02 instead of section 28-1816. The original bill focused on timing of arraignment, but the amendment would require the person to be brought before a court for their first appearance within 7 days of being arrested without a warrant. The appearance could be done by video. I'll ask for a green vote on AM 2928. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Wayne. No one else in the queue. Senator Wayne, you're recognized to close on the amendment and waives. Members, the question is the adoption of AM 2829. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
41 ayes, no nays, and adoption of the committee amendment, Mr. President.
AM 2829 is adopted. Seeing no one else in the queue, and Senator DeBoer. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, Senator DeBoer, I have AM 2281 with the note you wish to withdraw. In that case, Mr. President, I have nothing further on the bill.
And Senator DeBoer has waived her closing. Members, the question is advancement of LB 1167 to ENR initial. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
40 ayes, no nays, on advancement of the bill, Mr. President.
LB 1167 advances to ENR initial. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, Legislative Bill 1270, introduced by Education. This bill for an act relating to the Door to College Scholarship Act redefines the term, changes provisions relating to the powers and duties of an eligible post-secondary educational institution in the Coordinating Commission of Post-Secondary Education of the Act. Harmonized provisions repeals the original section. Bill was read for the first time on January 16th of this year and referred to the Education Committee. That committee placed the bill on general file. There are no committee amendments nor other amendments, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Senator Merman, you're recognized to open.
Thank you, Mr. Lieutenant Governor. And thank you, Speaker Arch, for placing LB 1270 on consent calendar. Today, we have a pretty simple bill seeking to make two small changes to the Door to College Scholarship Act. For some context, the act was created by LB 750 in 2023 and is set to become effective this July. The goal of this act is to provide a scholarship to students who enroll in college after attending from a YRTC. Currently, the Department of Health and Human Services and the Coordinating Commission for Post-Secondary Education are working on the process of developing program guidelines and application processes. They found two areas which could use some improvement. In the original act, there was a requirement that a student graduate from a non-YRTC high school within 1 year, a student graduate from a non-YRTC high school within 1 year of being discharged. This bill would remove that requirement so there can be an increase in the number of students who are eligible by successfully completing high school after being placed into and discharged from a YRTC. There is also a change in the verification of a student's previous status at a YRTC. That information was previously verified by the college, but would be better verified directly by DHHS. This would ensure personal information is better protected. To conclude, I'll note that this bill brought in a few different proponent testifiers with no opponents, has no fiscal impact, and received unanimous support from all members of the Education Committee. Thank you, and with that, I'll ask for your green vote on LB 1270.
Thank you, Senator Merman. Senator Walls, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just briefly wanted to stand up and give my full support on, I can't read, LB 1270 by Senator Merman. This is just a great program that gives kids who are attending YRTCs or who have been in the YRTC program the chance to see new opportunities for continuing their education in post-secondary and really opening another door for them. So again, I'm in full support of this. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Walls. Seeing no one else in the queue, Senator Merman, you're recognized to close and waive. Members, the question is the advancement of LB 1270 to E&R initial. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
38 days, no nays on advancement of the bill, Mr. President.
LB 1270 advances to E&R initial. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, Legislative Bill 1095, introduced by Senator Doran. This bill for an act relating to motor fuels changes the E15 Access Standard Act as prescribed, changes provision relating to tax credits under the Nebraska Biodiesel Tax Credit Act, and repeals the original section. The bill was read for the first time on January 9th of this year, referred to the Revenue Committee. That committee placed the bill on general file. There are no committee amendments, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Senator Dorn, you're recognized to open.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. I also want to thank Speaker Arch for scheduling this and thank the the Department of Revenue or the Revenue Committee for passing this out 8-0. LB 1095 is a cleanup bill from last year's LB 562. If you remember, 562 was adopted creating the E15 Access Standard Act, which established criteria for gas stations to sell E15 and receive tax credits. The Department of Revenue and the Department of Agriculture, the two agencies responsible for handling the oversight of LB 562, requested the changes before you today. LB 1095 clarifies the definition of motor fuels to include all products and fuel commonly or commercially known as gasoline, including ethanol and the various ethanol and gasoline blends. It changes the definition of motor fuel dispensers to mean storage tanks, pumps, and dispensers, and removes the list of parts for pumps and dispensers. It clarifies the average annual gas gallonage to the most recent 3 years that pertains to small retail locations. That was originally in the bill listed as the starting 3 years for this bill. This changes it to the most recent 3 years. And lastly, it clarifies if there is a blend of diesel and biodiesel, only the biodiesel portion is eligible for the credit. The Department of Revenue and Agriculture both sent letters in support. I would ask that you advance LB 1095 onto select file. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Dorn. See no one else in the queue, and you waive closing. Members, the question is the adoption or the advancement of LB 1095 to E and R initial. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
39 ayes, no nays, Mr. President, on advancement of the bill.
LB 1095 advances to E and R initial. Mr. Clerk, next item on the agenda.
Mr. President, next item, Legislative Bill 484, introduced by Senator Mosier. It's a bill for enacting the Motor Vehicle Industry Regulation Act. Provides for continuing education for licensed motor vehicle dealers and for authorization to conduct an educational seminar for continuing education credit as prescribed. Eliminates a requirement for the Nebraska Motor Vehicle Industry Licensing Board to maintain an office in the state capitol. Harmonizes provisions, provides an operative date, and repeals the original section. Bill was read for the first time on January 17th of last year and referred to the Transportation and Telecommunications Committee. That committee placed the bill on general file with committee amendments, Mr. President. There is an additional amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Senator Mosier, you're recognized to open.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good afternoon, colleagues and fellow Nebraskans. LB 484 is brought at the request of the Nebraska Independent Auto Dealers Association. The purpose of the bill is to professionalize independent dealers within the motor vehicle industry. The bill came out of Transportation and Telecommunication with a committee amendment AM 790 on a 7-0 vote with one member absent. It places educational requirements for independent dealers applying for a new license, and then on subsequent renewals, there's a requirement. Specifically, they'd have to complete 8 hours of educational materials approved by the Motor Vehicle Industry Licensing Board. Independent dealers renewing their license would have to complete 4 hours of continuing education during the calendar year. Independent dealers would then have a better understanding of the rules and regulations of selling motor vehicles when getting started in business and will be kept up to date through continuing education requirements. These requirements do not apply to franchise dealers. Colleagues, I ask for your green vote on LB 484 and AM 790 and to send the bill on to select file. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Mosier. As the clerk stated, there are committee amendments. Senator Mosier, you're recognized to open.
Thank you. The committee amendment
changes, the first one changes the operative date from January 1, 2024 to January 1, 2025. Since the committee adopted this bill last session, there will be a follow-up amendment to change this date to 2026. Secondly, the language in Section 2 is clarified. The intent of the bill as introduced remains unchanged. The initial dealer applicant must complete 8 hours of continuing education, and the renewal of a dealer's license will require completion of 4 hours continuing education within the 12 months prior to applying for renewal of the dealer's license. Colleagues, please vote green for LB 484 and AM 790. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Mosier. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, Senator Mosier would move to amend with AM 2939.
Senator Mosier, you're recognized to open.
Thank you. Since this took 2 years to get done, we have another amendment to change that operative date from 2025 to January 1, 2026. And that's all this amendment does. I'd appreciate your support of 484, 790, and 2939. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Mosier. Seeing no one else in the queue, you're recognized to close and waive closing on AM 2939. Members, the question is the adoption of AM 2939. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
36 ayes, no nays, Mr. President, on adoption of the amendment.
AM 2939 is adopted. Seeing no one else in the queue, Senator Mosier, you're recognized to close on AM 790 and waive. Members, the question is the adoption of AM 790. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
38 ayes, no nays, Mr. President, on adoption of the committee amendment.
AM 790 is adopted. Seeing no one else in the queue, Senator Mosier, you're recognized to close and waive closing on the advancement of LB 484. Members, the question is the advancement of LB 484 to E&R initial. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
38 ayes, 1 nay, Mr. President, on advancement of the bill.
LB 484 is advanced to E&R initial. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, returning to the agenda, select file legislative bill 1118. Senator, I have nothing on the bill.
Senator Ballard for a motion.
Mr. President, I move that LB 1118 be advanced to E&R for engrossing.
Members, you've heard the motion to advance LB 1118 for E&R engrossing. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say nay. It is advanced. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, select file legislative bill 1143. Senator, I have nothing on the bill.
Senator Ballard for a motion.
Mr. President, I move that LB 1143 be advanced to E&R for engrossing.
Members, you've heard the motion to advance LB 1143 for E&R engrossing. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say nay. It is advanced. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, select file legislative bill 877. Senator, first of all, I have E&R amendments.
Senator Ballard, you're recognized for a motion.
Mr. President, I move the E&R amendments to LB 877 be adopted.
Members, you've heard the motion to adopt the E&R amendments. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say nay. It is adopted.
Senator, I have nothing further on the bill.
Senator Ballard, you're recognized for a motion.
Mr. President, I move that LB 877 be advanced to E&R for engrossing.
Members, you've heard the motion to advance LB 877 for E&R engrossing. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say nay. It is advanced. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, legislative bill 998, select file. Senator, I have nothing on the bill.
Senator Ballard, you're recognized for a motion.
Mr. President, I move that LB 998 be advanced to E&R for engrossing.
Members, you've heard the motion to advance LB 998 for E&R engrossing. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed say nay. It is advanced. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, select file legislative bill 1162. First of all, Senator, there are E&R amendments.
Senator Ballard, you're recognized for motion.
Mr. President, I move the E&R amendments to LB 1162 be adopted.
Members, you've heard the motion to adopt the E&R amendments. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. They are adopted.
Mr. President, Senator Lowe would move to amend with AM 2946.
Senator Lowe, you're recognized to open.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. AM 2946 is a simple fix. Basically, there was an oopsies on my last amendment. The previous amendment in this bill was actually went a little too far on the change. AM 2946 addresses that mistake, but also ensures that we accomplish the intent of LB 1162. Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. Oopsie.
Thank you, Senator Lowe. Seeing no one else in the queue, you recognize close and waive closing. Members, the question is the adoption of AM 2946. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
34 ayes, no nays on adoption of the amendment, Mr. President.
AM 2946 is adopted.
I have nothing further on the bill, Senator.
Senator Ballard, you're recognized for a motion.
Mr. President, I move that LB 1162 be advanced to E&R for engrossing.
Members, you've heard the motion to advance LB 1162 for E&R engrossing. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say nay. It is advanced. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, select file legislative bill 851. I have nothing on the bill, Senator.
Senator Ballard, you're recognized for a motion.
Mr. President, I move that LB 851 be advanced to E&R for engrossing.
Members, you've heard the motion to advance LB 851 for E&R engrossing. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say nay. It is advanced. Mr. Clerk, items for the record.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members to be printed, Senator Reapy to LB 905A, Senator Holleran to LB 262. That's all I have this time, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Mr. Clerk, please proceed to the next items on the agenda.
Thank you, Mr. President. General file legislative bill 852, introduced by Senator Jacobson. It's a bill for an act relating to the Medicare Supplement Insurance Minimum Standards Act, provides limitations regarding reimbursement for durable medical equipment, prosthetics, orthodontics, and supplies, and repeals the original section, declares an emergency. The bill is read for the first time on January 3rd of this year and referred to the Banking, Commerce, and Insurance Committee. That committee placed the bill on general file with committee amendments, Mr. President.
Senator Jacobson, you're recognized to open.
Thank you, Mr. President. And let me first say that I've come so close to being able to open on this bill, and it's been whisked away from me. So I will take sympathy votes today because it's been that kind of a couple of weeks waiting to get here. So thank you, Speaker Arch. So with that said, LB 852 addresses an issue that was brought to my attention by the members of the Nebraska insurance industry while discussing other Medicare insurance issues. Medicare, as a reminder, is the federal health insurance program for seniors and certain disabled individuals. The issue that LB 852 addresses is a loophole in federal Medicare law exploited by a small number of durable medical equipment suppliers to the detriment of Medicare beneficiaries in Nebraska and Medicare supplement insurers. Under current federal guidance, there are three types of providers under Medicare: a provider that accepts Medicare assignment as agreed to, bill Medicare directly, and accept the Medicare approved payment amount. There are also providers who choose to opt out of Medicare, and as the term implies, they do not work with Medicare. Seniors who receive service from an opt-out provider are responsible for the full cost of care. The third category are providers who are called non-participating providers. A non-participating provider can choose to accept the Medicare approved payment amount for items and services on a case-by-case basis. For most items and services, a non-participating provider charge up to 15% over the Medicare approved amount for a service, but no more than that. And the Medicare beneficiary may have to pay the full amount charged by the provider at the time of service. While the cap on non-participating providers is 15% higher than the Medicare reimbursement rate, that applies to all other types of Medicare providers, such as physician services and hospital services. The federal government has not applied this rule to durable medical equipment suppliers. Durable medical equipment, or DME suppliers, are businesses that supply home health equipment that is reusable, such as wheelchairs, home oxygen equipment, prosthetics, etc. This gap in the federal rule has led some DME providers to charge both beneficiaries and the Medicare supplement insurers rates significantly higher than the Medicare rates, to the level that insurers believe that the levels are abusive. At the committee hearing on LB 852, we heard examples of suppliers that charged $91,000 for a prosthetic nose and nearly $40,000 for power wheelchairs. These charges over the Medicare rate are paid by both the insurer and the beneficiary. When the beneficiary pays the difference between the Medicare paid and the bills charged, this is known as balance billing. When an insurer pays the excess payments, this leads to higher premiums for all senior citizens. As I mentioned previously, and other providers except DME suppliers are subject to the federal cap on the amount that they can charge for items and services under Medicare. In effect, LB 852 closes a loophole in federal law that allows DME suppliers to balance bill seniors and file excessive charges to Medicare supplement plans. I know Chairwoman Slama will discuss this when we get to the committee amendment, but AM 2355 also includes the provision for another bill I introduced, LB 32. LB 32 would allow eligible Medicare recipients under the age of 65 to enroll in Medicare supplement insurance plans upon becoming eligible for Medicare. A number of states have laws similar to the provision of LB 32 that provides individuals who are under the age of 65 and eligible for Medicare to obtain Medicare supplement coverage. I introduced this bill after learning from the struggles my constituent faced at the hearing on LB 32. Stephen K. talked about the struggles he and his wife Jean faced after she was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. At the same time, the Ks were coping with this terrible news. They had to figure out how to get insurance coverage. Ultimately, Stephen had to close his legal practice in North Platte and move to Fargo, North Dakota for a job that provided employer-sponsored insurance for him and his wife. Had LB 32 been in place, the Kays could have purchased a Medicare supplement plan instead and continued to live and work in North Platte. You will note that the insurance industry testified in opposition of LB 32. However, I worked over the interim with the proponents and opponents of this bill to find common ground between all the parties. Under the agreement, Medicare supplement carriers would have to offer at least one plan to individuals who are under the age of 65 and eligible for Medicare due to disability. The premium a carrier could charge an individual is capped at 150% of the rate for individuals who are 65. AM 2355 also clarifies that an individual is eligible to the same open enrollment period that all Medicare beneficiaries have access to upon reaching the age of 65. The committee amendment is a carefully crafted agreement on LB 32. I spent most of the fall meeting with the interested parties on this issue, and I'm going to suggest that everyone is happy with the agreement, but I also think it is the sign of a good agreement. All parties gave something and nobody got everything they wanted. I also want to thank Speaker Arch for selecting LB 852 as a priority bill. These are complicated issues, but I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. I encourage your green vote on AM 2355 and LB 852.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Senator Jacobson. As stated, there is a committee amendment. Senator Slama, you're recognized to open.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good afternoon, colleagues. AM 2355 is the committee amendment to LB 852. LB 2355 amends the bill in the following ways. It changes the definition of Medicare approved amount. It changes the use of the term not participating supplier to non-participating supplier. It clarifies that the limiting charge is 15% over the Medicare rate. It adds new language clarifying that nothing in LB 852 may be construed to prevent an issuer from negotiating the level and type of reimbursement with this supplier for covered durable medical equipment, prosthetics, orthotics, or supplies. Section 5 of AM 2355 contains the provisions of one other bill, LB 32, as amended by AM 2252. The baseline amendment is still 2355. LB 32 would amend Section 443601 of the Medical Supplement Insurance Minimum Standards Act and add a new section to the act. The new section added would make individuals under 65 who are eligible for Medicare by reason of disability or end-stage renal disease eligible for Medicare supplement policies or certificates in Nebraska. Currently, such individuals are prevented from participating in Medicare supplement policies and certificates in Nebraska. I'll let Senator Jacobson provide a fuller description of LB 32 as amended, but briefly, Section 5 of the committee amendment added LB 32 as amended by AM 2252. AM 2252 made the following changes to LB 32. It removed those individuals who are under 65 with end-stage renal disease from qualifying for Medicare supplement policies or certificates under LB 32. It removed language that required a guaranteed renewable basis for policies. It also removed the weighted average formula for calculating premiums rates for those under 65 and adds new language allowing insurance companies to charge different premium rates for those under 65 than they do for those 65 or older. However, any differences in those premium amounts must not be excessive, inadequate, or unfairly discriminatory, and must be based on sound actuarial principles and be reasonable in relation to the benefits provided. The premium for those under 65 may not exceed 150% of the premium for similarly situated individuals who are 65 or older. Finally, AM 2252 adds new language to LB 32 stating that an individual who is under 65 and who is eligible for a Medicare supplement policy or certificate by reason of disability will be subject to the same open enrollment rules applicable to an individual who is 65 and eligible for a Medicare supplement policy or certificate beginning on the first day of the first month that the individual turns 65. Thank you very much. This compromise amendment came out of Committee 8-0 along with the baseline bill, and I hope for your green vote on AM 2355, the committee amendment to LB 52. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Slama. Mr. Clerk, for items.
Mr. President, Senator Jacobson would move to amend LB 852 committee amendments with AM 2732.
Senator Jacobson, you're recognized to open.
Thank you, Mr. President. AM 2732 is a white copy amendment that replaces the committee amendment. However, changes made to AM 2732 are limited to section 2, 3, and 4, which are the original portions of LB 852. Sections 5 and 6 of the amendment are the same as the committee amendment, representing the compromise I reached with the insurance industry on LB 32, which is a provision of Medicare supplement insurance to under 65 disabled population. When the original LB 852 was introduced, some local durable medical equipment suppliers who sell lower cost items to seniors were concerned that the Medicare rates were insufficient to cover the acquisition costs of some of the items they are selling. They were concerned that the Nebraskans who wanted upgraded items would be unable to purchase such items, even on their own, because the language in LB 852 was too restrictive. Insurance companies met with those DME providers several times and came up with a compromise language in AM 2732 that will allow Nebraskans to purchase upgraded items on their own with certain disclosures, while at the same time protecting Medicare beneficiaries from balanced billing. AM 2732 adds the definition of balanced billing to the LB 852 as the charging or collecting an amount in excess of the Medicare approved amount from the Medicare beneficiary. The amendment rewrites section 3 of the bill to provide that DME providers who are a non-participating provider in Medicare do not accept assignment. This means the DME supplier can bill either Medicaid or the beneficiary depending upon the claim. They will directly bill the beneficiary. They cannot balance bill a Medicaid beneficiary unless a Medicare beneficiary unless the beneficiary agrees in writing to pay the additional amount above the Medicare rate and pays the full amount up front. This written agreement must be disclosed to the beneficiary. Medicare will reimburse the beneficiary or supplier at 80% of the Medicare rate, and the Medicare supplement insurer will not reimburse in any amount greater than 115% of the Medicare rate if the beneficiary would like to upgraded piece of durable medical equipment. Those are disclosures that must be provided to the Medicare beneficiary. Section 4 is amended to provide that Medicare supplement insurers shall not be required to reimburse in an amount greater than 115% of Medicare rate, which is consistent with limiting charge rules Medicare applies to all other medical payments under Medicare. Section 4 does allow a Medicare supplement insurer and DME supplier to negotiate the level and type of reimbursement. This amendment provides the needed tools to stop the abusive practices of a very small number of DME suppliers who take advantage of the federal loophole that prevents the application of the limiting charge rule to DME suppliers while balancing the ability of Nebraska Medicare beneficiaries to buy upgraded equipment if they so desire. These abusive practices annually cost Nebraska premium payers hundreds of thousands of dollars. And like I said earlier, this is a white copy amendment. It does not change the compromise language of the committee amendment related to LB 32, which will provide the ability of the individuals under 65 who are eligible for Medicare by reason of disability to purchase Medicare supplement insurance. AM 2732 is a good compromise between DME suppliers and insurers that will protect Nebraskans. I encourage your green vote on this amendment. I would make one other comment here. I know in Chairwoman Slama's comments, I do want to make it clear that anyone that is disabled under age 65, that their premium would be no greater than 150% of the age 65 rate. Not over age 65, because it does graduate up. And then once they reach age 65, then they would be eligible to go into Medicare at whatever that rate is at the one-time amount. So we think it's a great compromise, long time coming. Thank you all for listening, and please vote through AM 2732 as amended into 2355 and ultimately LB 852. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Jacobson. Senator Clements, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I am going to vote for the bill, but I do have some concerns. The durable medical equipment bill is very important to me. That the fraud and scams that have been performed on that. I agree we need to do some corrections there. The add-on amendment from another bill where we're providing health insurance to those people that are disabled and on Medicare under age 65. I've been selling health insurance for 45 years, and that's been something that not been available in Nebraska. And occasionally I've had people asking about that. I think they are able to get a Medicare Advantage plan now, but this would let them get a Medicare supplement plan. I looked at the Medicare supplement that I have with Blue Cross Blue Shield, and the 100, well, on page 3 of this amendment, on line 28 said the rates shall be based on sound actuarial principles, and saying that everybody from age, let's say 26 to age 64 is going to have one rate, no matter where they live, male or female, tobacco use, what plan they're on. I'm not sure if how many variables they can qualify for, but I don't think one rate for a large group of people is a sound actuarial principle. And I was looking at the plan I have is the age 65 rate is about $190 a month. And if the 150% of that would go to about $285. And that's the age 77 rate for the plan I have. In 4 years, I'll be paying that rate. I'll be paying the same rate as somebody who is less healthy than me. I wonder if Senator Jacobson would yield to a question.
Senator Jacobson, would you yield to a question?
Yes, I would.
Do you know how many plans are going to be available for a person under 65 with disability? Are there going to be how many plans does the company have to offer to a person?
The way the bill would be written, they only have to offer one plan. And so, as you know, there's multiple plans and they can choose. And my guess is they won't be picking the cheapest plan.
Okay, one plan, because I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 that I see Blue Cross offers. And I've heard that other states offer this. Are you aware of what other states nearby us offer? Are there other states that already do this with Medicare supplements?
I can't get you into a lot of the details. I do know that several of the states around us do offer it. They don't offer it. They don't necessarily put the 150% premium cap. I shouldn't say they offer it straight up under age 65, and they're not allowing the upcharging.
1 minute.
And a lot of the people there were some people that raised questions about that felt that we should not, that this should just be opened up, that it'll only be a few dollars a month. And actually, we're working with the insurance companies. That's really not the case. There will be some increase in premiums. That is the case. But we have a pool of people that need to get covered.
Thank you. That's probably my main concern. My rates are going to go up a little bit, but it's going to be a good benefit for disabled people. So I will support the amendments in the bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senators Clements and Jacobson. Seeing no one else in the queue, Senator Jacobson, you're recognized to close on AM 2732.
I promise to be very, very brief on my close. A couple other questions that got raised. I think it's important to note one of the big discussion points was, what do we do with those who are disabled by virtue of end-stage renal disease, ESRD, who are on dialysis? I will tell you that that is a very, very expensive proposition. That was one of the things we learned early on in the insurance company negotiations that seemed to be a non-negotiable. And so ultimately in the compromise, ESRD patients will not be covered under the supplement plan, but will have to look at a Medicare Advantage plan. And so that is available to them, but they won't be able to get in under the supplement plan because of the very concerns that Senator Clements raised. You would see a significant premium increase, or you could, depending on the provider. I would tell you, however, that I have talked with the insurance providers, that I do have concerns about Medicare Advantage, and I want to make certain the Medicare Advantage providers are going to deal in good faith with the dialysis centers, particularly in rural Nebraska. And so I do expect to come back and continue to watch this and work with the insurance providers and the ESRD patients and the dialysis facilities to make certain that we do have access to these facilities and that there's a reasonable rate being paid to these providers as well. So that was something that we did outside of this, but I believe that this is a good compromise, and we'll see where we go as it relates to Medicare Advantage coverages and making sure that that's still available for rural Nebraska. So with that, I would encourage everyone's green vote. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Jacobson. Members, the question is the adoption of AM 2732. All those in favor, vote aye. All those opposed, vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
37 ayes, no nays on adoption of the amendment, Mr. President.
AM 2732 is adopted. Senator Slama, you're recognized to close on the committee amendment and waives. Members, the question is the adoption of Members, the question is the adoption of AM 2355. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
39 ayes, no nays on adoption of the committee amendments, Mr. President.
The amendment is adopted. Senator Clemens, you're recognized to speak.
One final thing, not being actuarial calculations, these premiums, if they were calculated on the risk of these people, the premiums would be unaffordable for the disabled people who are under age 65. And so this is a compromise to let the companies charge a higher premium than an age 65 rate, but it's probably about half of what it should be, the charge should be. But if you went to $500 a month for this premium coverage, they probably couldn't even buy it. So just want to make it clear that I think it is going to raise rates on people who are currently on policies over age 65, but that it's reasonable to let the companies charge somewhat higher premium, but if they charge much more, I don't think people could even afford it, so it wouldn't be a benefit. So I do still support the bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Clemens. Seeing no one else in the queue, Senator Jacobson, you're recognized and waive closing. Members, the question is the advancement of LB 852 to E&R initial. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
38 ayes, no nays on advancement of the bill, Mr. President.
LB 852 advances to E&R initial. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, next item, Legislative Bill 1344, introduced by Senator Wayne. It's a bill for enacting the Nebraska Innovation Hub Act. Redefines terms, changes provisions relating to iHub applications, designations, and terminations as prescribed, requires a report to the legislature, harmonized provisions, repeals its original section. Bill was read for the first time on January 17th of this year and referred to the Urban Affairs Committee. That committee placed the bill on general file with committee amendments, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Senator Wayne, you're recognized to open.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think the clerk did a great job on my opening. That's what the bill does. I would ask you to vote green. I know you want to get out of here. No, I'll just be real brief. And what the brief is, this is actually for part of the Preserve the Third district because the iHub originally, when Senator McKitty passed it 2 years ago, had a deadline date of July, whatever, for the application. So no more applications were actually taken. So because it's in statute, we have to remove that statute and create and let it stay open. So we actually are removing that and we're putting some limitations around how many are created. But if you look, we treat it by congressional district. So congressional district 1 and 3 have a lot more opportunities for iHubs. But the real reason this bill is there is just because it's closed and nobody in Western Nebraska can even apply to be an iHub. There is no funding right now designated into going to iHubs except for the one that was passed 2 years ago for part of the Omaha recovery stuff. So this is truly about preserving the third, creating innovation in the third district. One change is around inland ports because Hershey has one, Grand Island's applying for one, Bellevue. So inland ports could also apply to be an iHub around innovation. So this is just around innovation, no money. It's $1,000 fiscal note, but it's really about opening up the opportunity to Western Nebraska, primarily because they did not apply at the time, and we want to make sure they have an opportunity. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Wayne. Senator McKinney, you're recognized to open on the committee amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. AM 2361 has 2 changes. One, it states to allow location of an iHub instead of being in an inland port district as defined in section 13-3033. iHub shall now be located 30 miles of the largest artificial reservoir constructed in the state for the storage of water or any county having a population of less than 100,000 inhabitants. The second change is it has the director determine whether or not to approve the requested iHub designation within 45 days after receiving the application. This was voted out of the Urban Affairs Committee on a 6-1 vote. That 1 is an absent vote. It's not a no vote. And I would encourage your support of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator McKinney. Seeing no one else in the queue, you're recognized to close on the committee amendment and waive. Members, the question is the adoption of AM 2361. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
35 ayes, no nays on adoption of the committee amendment, Mr. President.
AM 2361 is adopted. Seeing no one else in the queue, Senator Wayne, you're recognized to close and waive closing. Members, the question is the advancement of LB 1344 to ENR initial. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
38 ayes, no nays, Mr. President, on advancement of the bill.
LB 1344 advances to E&R initial. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, General File Legislative Bill 1197, introduced by Senator Von Gillern. This bill for enacting the Sports Arena Facility Financing Assistance Act defines and redefines terms, changes provisions related to the use of state assistance applications, certain limitations on state assistance, harmonized provisions, and repeals the original section. Bill was read for the first time on January 16th of this year and referred to the Revenue Committee. That committee placed the bill on general file. There are committee amendments, Mr. President, as well as additional amendments.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Senator Von Gillern, you're recognized to open.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, colleagues and Nebraskans. I rise to ask for your support for LB 1197 and the White Copy Amendment AM 2715. 1197 includes modifications to the Sports Arena Facility Financing Act created by the previous legislature and is a turnback tax incentive for youth and other sports facilities. The original act was designed to accomplish two things. It's an economic stimulus bill and provides a means to improve our communities. Through the use of the program, a greater number of youth may be served across Nebraska and be given an opportunity to play organized sports. At the hearing, it was stated that over 800 middle school and high school age girls were turned away from organized volleyball in Omaha last year simply due to lack of space to play. I have two daughters who were once teenagers, and I can speak from experience that everyone in the house was happier when they were busy and tired. Youth sports is a great way to keep kids focused and out of trouble, and it's proven to improve grades and behaviors. 1197 is a new and improved version of a bill that I brought last year, and the new version, including the White Copy Amendment 2715, has worked out some bugs related to ownership definition and also further clarifies language around contiguous land use, project size, limitations of duration of the turnback, and various other items. Additionally, the amendment modifies the original act and makes the program more usable for cities of the second class and villages, thus broadening the impact across the state. Another feature of the Sports Arena Facility Financing Act is that 30% of the turnback dollars are to be used for the CCCFF, Civic and Community Center Financing Fund. And our amendment broadens slightly the uses for those funds to be used in creative districts across Nebraska. Currently, there are 28 creative districts that are certified and another 20 small communities are in progress. These communities are able to leverage funding with federal grants, block grants, community foundations, private foundations, corporate and civic campaigns to fund public art projects, visitor attractions, arts festivals, restore theaters, etc. I'm aware of youth sports projects in various stages of planning and development in Omaha, Valley, Fremont, Lincoln, Norfolk, Grand Island, and Valentine. With the improvements made in this bill, certainly others will take advantage. The fiscal note is indeterminate as there's no way to know how many projects may be built, but please recall that with a turnback tax, no tax is surrendered if no projects are built. If a project is constructed, additional tax revenue flows to the state that would not otherwise. I want to thank Senator Aguilar, who worked with us on the language, along with Senators Linehan and Bostar, who helped author and improve portions of the bill. I also want to thank the proponents, including Lady Huskers volleyball coach John Cook, who provided a letter of support that was read into record at the hearing. Coach Cook said, "Nebraska is behind in sports complex. The inventory for children to play doesn't fit. This will help provide us more opportunities for Nebraskans to play youth sports. This is a quality of life issue that will attract and keep the best and brightest here," unquote. The bill came out of committee 8-0. I would ask for your green light on LB 1197 and 2715. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Von Gillern. Senator Linehan, you're recognized to open on the committee amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. AM 2419 to LB 1197 makes several changes to the original bill to assist in achieving the intent of the legislation. Most of these changes came from the original AM 2379 that was filed by Senator Von Gillern, with one additional change added. The changes include changes wording from nonprofit organization to nonprofit corporation, provides a distinction between publicly owned and privately owned sports complexes as the definition for governmental use, eliminates the definition for nonprofit organization, adds school district, community college, and joint interlocal cooperation act created entity, including city, village, county, or definition of political subdivision. Adds, I know we all want to go, adds a provision to the definition of program area that 25% of the 600 adjacent yards is unbuildable. The program area can be adjusted to accommodate much as practical to do so, to include other property. Anyway, it's a great bill. We worked on it really hard. I appreciate your green vote on this AM.
Thank you, Senator Linehan. Mr. Clerk, for amendments.
Mr. President, Senator Von Gillern would move to amend with AM 2715.
Senator Von Gillern, you're recognized to open on the amendment.
Thank you. I kind of killed the suspense on that one. I included it in my opening statement. So again, the details about 2715, I already talked about in the opening. If you have any questions about that, I'd be happy to take them. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Von Gillern. Returning to the queue, Senator Dungan, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good almost evening, colleagues. I agree with Senator Linehan. I know we all want to get going. I just wanted to rise in support of both AMs on the board as well as LB 1197 and just take a second to talk a little bit more about the bill with regards to the hard work that went into this. So Senator Von Gillern had worked very hard, I know, last session and during the interim and on this session to address some of the issues that have been raised previously. I think both of the AMs address those problems very, very well. What I also like about this bill is it really is one of those bills that brings together people from all different walks of life. He did specifically mention in his opening the creative districts, and I do appreciate sort of that shout out because they are a really important thing here in Nebraska. If you look at the committee statement, we have a number of proponents who came in and testified, including Mike Markey from the Arts Council. I found his testimony really compelling, talking about those creative districts and what benefits they bring. And I think by virtue of the fact that part of this turnback tax ultimately can go to that CCCFF and then benefit those creative districts is always helpful. In addition to that, we heard some really compelling testimony from, as you said, some youth who had been turned away due to capacity problems when it comes to having the proper facilities. And so I think that this addresses a real concern and a real problem in a pretty effective way. And it does so by bringing together people from all different walks of life. And so just want to thank Senator Von Gillern for his hard work on this. I think the committee has done a good job sort of listening to the concerns and addressing those. And so that's why it did come out 8-0, but I just wanted to speak in favor of that. So please, colleagues, I urge your green vote on LB 1197 as well as both of the AMs on the board. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Dungan. Senator Erdman, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was wondering if Senator Von Gillern would answer a question or two for me.
Senator Von Gillern, would you yield to some questions?
I will.
Senator Von Gillern, can you reiterate the towns or the communities you said be available for this again?
The projects that I know of currently, and I'm moving from east to west, are in Omaha, Valley, Fremont, Lincoln, Norfolk, Grand Island, and Valentine.
Okay, thank you. So you also had commented about the fiscal note, and I'm looking at it now, and it says the revenue impact on the general fund and cash fund remains unknown. And it talked about the projects that have been currently funded, and it said for comparison purposes, 15.725 million was transferred during the fiscal year 22-23 under the terms of the Sports Arena Facilities Act. Are you familiar with who received that $15 million?
I am not. I know of no, I don't know with specificity. I know of some projects that were interested in it, but I don't actually know if they took advantage of it. So what I'm doing is more looking forward. I'm sorry.
All right, I was just curious about that. So as you have stated, several of those are in the eastern part of the state. It's good to hear that one of them is in the 3rd district in Valentine. That'd be good. So your comment earlier was once these facilities are built, then they'll begin to pay taxes as well as sales tax, and that revenue will come into the state. Will these facilities be built with TIF financing?
That is a local jurisdictional matter, and I don't know that we have any say over that.
Okay. But if in fact they were, then the revenue that we receive in the form of property tax may be very limited. Would that be a fair assumption?
If the communities where they're located elected to give them TIF, then yeah, it certainly would.
Okay. So was this bill or this bill, was this your intention or did somebody bring this to you?
It was my intention. I became aware of the opportunity. I became aware of some of the projects and wanted to see what I could do to advance them. The project in Valentine, I was not aware of until very recently, and that's what led us to change the definition for communities of a smaller size to actually reduce the requirement of the size of the project to something that was more practical for cities of a smaller class.
Okay. All right. That answers my questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senators Erdman and Von Gillern. Senator Clemens, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would Senator Von Gillern yield to some questions?
Senator Von Gillern, would you yield to some questions?
Yes.
Senator, the budget is based on general fund receipts, and sales tax is a large amount of general fund receipts. And you said that the fiscal note was indeterminate. Is there any estimate of how much reduction of state sales tax there would be?
The fiscal note noted that and I'm looking for it right now as we're speaking, noted that they could not determine because they don't know what projects are going to be constructed until those projects are constructed. And they vary in size in different communities. And so it would be very difficult for the fiscal office to project what that would be. But as Senator Erdman noted, it does talk about the history of what has been transferred in recent years.
And what happens in the turnback situation is the 5.5% given to the locality, and what amount would the state get of the sales tax?
The state gets 50% of that. And one of the things we did in this bill also was cap the time period on that. And in the smaller communities, we capped that time period at 5 years. And in the larger communities, we capped it at 10 years.
Oh, it would expire, the turnback would expire at those periods of time.
Yes, that's correct.
And is there a area around this development that's restricted to so many blocks around, or area, or is it anywhere in the city?
No, as Senator Linehan mentioned, the bill, the original bill limits to a 600-yard distance on the projects. But one of the things we did do in my amendment was we redefined what contiguous land. The original Sports Act calls for all land to be contiguous. But what was discovered that in some projects you might have a drainway or a private street or an alleyway that bisects a piece of property. So what we said is that if that land is joined in some way, that 600 yards could be continued onto another piece of property, where again we're not exceeding the 600 yards, but we redefined what contiguous use means.
Okay, the 600 yards applies. It's just it could be divided by a street or something.
Correct.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. President. I'm still thinking about this.
Thank you, Senator Clemens and Senator Von Gillern. Seeing no one else in the queue, Senator Von Gillern, you're recognized to close on AM 2715.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just again, back to a comment that I made, and Senator Clements had some great questions about how the turnback tax works. Again, if we had, and I'll just make it easy numbers, if a project is constructed and it generates $1 million in sales tax, half of that comes back to the state. $500,000 comes back to the state. It's easy to get focused on what doesn't come back to the state, but what we need to remember is that but for the turnback tax, those projects are unlikely to be built. So we want to see them get built. If it gets built, that's an additional $500,000 that comes back to the state using that example. So I would encourage your green vote on the amendment and eventually on the bill here. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Von Gillern. Members, the question is the adoption of AM 2715. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
33 ayes, 2 nays, Mr. President, on adoption of the amendment.
AM 2715 is adopted. Senator Moser, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was wondering if Senator Von Gillern would answer some questions.
Senator Von Gillern, will you yield to some questions?
Yes.
So have you looked into what leakage there is when you have a facility that draws people in? Do they steal business from other businesses that wind up costing the state money?
I don't, these are pretty unique facilities that are being constructed. There's not, and knowing what we know about again, the numbers that I mentioned about the number of kids that are getting turned away from programs, we're nowhere near a saturation point in these facilities. So I don't know that one would steal from another.
So are these like club sports kind of facilities?
Many of them are club sports facilities, yes.
And the turnback tax has to be spent on specific improvements to the facility?
On capital improvements, yes. Now, one thing you asked
is
about.
Is it kind of like a TIF thing, kind of?
No. TIF would be a local waiver of property taxes. This is a 50% turnback of sales tax for a limited period of time. Again, 5 years for small projects and 10 years for larger projects. We did, one additional clarification I didn't mention earlier is the bill also opens it up for use by community colleges. So, so they would be able to use the turnback also.
Like to build a new gymnasium or something?
It's a sports facility that falls within the criteria, yes.
What about the location? Are they primarily built in metropolitan class cities or primary class?
Well, as I said, there's the smallest community that I'm aware of that is considering this as Valentine. I know of a project in Grand Island that Senator Aguilar was interested in the language that we talked about in Norfolk, in Fremont and Valley. So there is a project I know of in Omaha, and I believe there's one that's going on in Lincoln right now.
Is it only for sports facilities? Could it be fine arts?
The act, the way that it was originally drafted, also includes concert facilities. That wasn't part of my bill, but that was the way that the act was originally drafted. So concert venues and so on.
They're still qualified?
They qualify under the original act. Yeah. My amendment and my bill has nothing to do with that.
Your bill replaces the whole act, or?
No.
It just modifies?
Just modifies it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Mosier. You see no one else in the queue? Senator Jacobson, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll try to be brief here. I'd like to ask if Senator Von Gilleren would respond to a question.
Senator Von Gilleren, will you yield to some questions?
Yes.
Senator Von Gilleren, I'd like to follow up a little bit of line on what Senator Mosier was talking about. So let's assume that there's a new sports arena. Let's say it's a volleyball facility that gets built near the outlet mall at Gretna. So when we talk about 50% of the sales taxes, are we talking about 50% of the sales tax growth, which we would see if it was like a tax increment financing project on property taxes? Are we talking about that they would capture 50% of all of the sales taxes generated that are pre-existing and new?
It would be 50% of the sales tax that is new sales tax that is generated due to the construction of the facility. And if I could add one more thing, because you mentioned a great point that I neglected to mention, this has nothing to do with the Gretna project. The project that has been proposed, the Good Life District project, this is a totally different animal than what we're talking about here. There are other turnback taxes that exist, and this is just one of those that turns back 50% of the new sales tax revenue that's generated by these facilities.
So to be clear, when a facility gets built, the day they open the doors, are we going back to the previous year end, or when are we or the previous month, or when are we capturing that sales tax base, pre-existing base?
To my knowledge, I don't believe we're capturing anything pre-existing.
No, but I'm just saying, when do we determine what was pre-existing and what's new?
Again, my understanding is that the day that they open the doors and start selling to the public and generating, whenever sales tax is collected.
But my point would be that if you're taking a 600-yard radius, you're going to bring in existing retailers. Let's say something. Yeah.
I'm sorry for
Great,
interrupting you.
thank you.
Now I understand your question. My apologies.
I probably
600-yard
stuttered.
radius has nothing to do with other existing retail. It allowed, the project is allowed to be built with everything about the project has to exist within a 600-yard radius about the new project that's being constructed. It does not capture existing retail
Great.
in other areas.
Thank you. That's what
Thank
I
you.
needed. Thank you.
My apologies, I didn't follow the question.
Thank you, Senator Von Gilleren and Senator Jacobson. Senator Mosher, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you. I was wondering if I could ask Senator Von Gilleren a question, please.
Senator, will you yield to some questions?
Yes.
So now this is just the state portion of the sales tax?
Yes.
So the local portion still gets paid at whatever rate it is if they have a 1.5 or 2%?
Yes, and they could obviously choose to do any local option sales tax or whatever they elect to do that has nothing to do with the city.
Along the lines of Senator Jacobson's question, is there double dipping possible where they could be in the radius of one of the outlet malls or someplace that's already getting a turnback tax, and then we have a new facility that also gives turnback tax?
I don't honestly know the answer to that question. I don't know of any projects that are anticipated. The Good Life District is a total another animal that has nothing to do with this discussion.
Who regulates who could get this tax? Who would?
Department of Revenue.
Department of Revenue, not economic development?
No.
And you're developing the rules and regs, or the revenue is?
This bill was drafted by the previous legislature. This was a Brett Lindstrom bill that was passed 4 years ago, I believe. And all we're doing, we're making some minor modifications to redefine the ownership structure and redefine the continuous land use, and also broaden it slightly so it can be used by more communities.
I understand economic development is important, but I just worry that we keep giving turnback taxes, we keep giving TIF, we keep giving people tax exemptions, and then we wonder why we don't have enough money to balance our budget sometimes. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Mosher. Senator Wayne, you're recognized to speak. And waves.
No, I don't. I'm right here. Sorry, my office was calling about tomorrow's agenda. And anyway, thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, this is for rural Nebraska. I just want to make sure people understand this. So like Omaha is the Mecca. It's a big complicated formula and it goes all over the place. The issue is some of these funds aren't getting to where they need to go or what the community needs. So particularly, we can use Valentine for an example. They need a particular thing and they're trying to figure out a way to do it. These dollars are there, and this is, I'll be honest. I told Von Giller initially I didn't like this bill because it's moving money to different areas, but I read it again and I'm like, this is what's needed everywhere else. So it's a good bill. I would just ask people to vote green on, not because it's me, but you're having a urban senator, if that's what you want to call it, another urban senator introducing a bill for rural Nebraska. This truly, truly helps out small communities get access to dollars that are already in the pot, making sure they can have some more abilities to use it in areas. As far as Senator Moser, your question regarding new versus old depends on which part of the act and where it's at. So in Mecca, they get to collect in a certain 600 yards, all sales a part of there. But underneath like the sports component to this, it's all new. So it has to be new items that are being sold. So there's two different parts of the, not this bill, but there's two different parts of the statute. So that's why the answer was, well, maybe. For this part, like Valentine, everywhere else, it's anything new during this time. So I just think it's a good bill for Western Nebraska and rural Nebraska to get some of these dollars, really that Omaha, Lincoln, other people are generating to help these communities grow. And so I would ask for a green vote, and I hope that answers your question, Senator Moser. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Wayne. Seeing no one else in the queue, Senator Linehan, you're recognized to close on the committee amendment and waive. Members, the question is the adoption of Members, the question is the adoption of AM 2419. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
36 ayes, no nays on adoption of the committee amendment, Mr. President.
AM 2419 is adopted. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, Senator Von Gilleren, I have AM 2379 with note you wish to withdraw.
Without objection, it is withdrawn.
In that case, Mr. President, I have nothing further on the bill.
Senator Von Gilleren, you're recognized to close and waive. Members, the question is the advancement of LB 1197 to E and R initial. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
34 ayes, no nays, Mr. President, on adoption, or excuse me, on advancement of the bill.
It is advanced. Mr. Clerk, for items.
Mr. President, Senator DeBoer, amendment to be printed to LB 1031. Single name add, Senator Raybold, name added to LR 323. Finally, Mr. President, priority motion, Senator Dover would move to adjourn the body until Friday, March 15th, 2024 at 9:00 a.m.
Members, you've heard the motion to adjourn. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say nay. We are adjourned.